Ladies and gentlemen, we will now convene the meeting of the Tennessee Advisory Commission on Intergovernmental Relations. And I would call your attention, members, to tab 6 in your notebook, Comprehensive Litter Review. The staff has scheduled some very good panelists today to make presentations, and I believe I'm being told that we, instead of having two separate panels, are we going to combine those? Or Mr.
Since
Director?
we actually have more seats than we normally do, I believe the intent is to go ahead and bring all 6 panelists up at the same time. We're still going to go in the same order that they're listed in.
Yeah, we will go in the same order, but we're just going to put y'all up here together. So if I can get Ms. Barry and the other panelists to come on up, we'd surely appreciate it. And Sean, yeah, if you'll just sit over there, Sean, and then there you go. We got it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We're actually still waiting for 2 panelists.
Oh.
Mayor Ketron and Janet Boscarino from Clean Memphis. And Janet is walking over from Tennessee Tower now.
But they're in the panel that goes second?
Yeah, so we could potentially start. And
okay.
We know Janet's on her way, and I mean, Mayor Ketron knows how to get here, so I'm sure he's...
Yeah. Okay, yeah, we do need to start.
Okay.
If she's walking over, she'll be here in just a minute or two.
Hopefully, yeah.
So if you'll get us started, Ms. Barry.
Sure. Well, good morning, members. My name is Jennifer Barry, and I'll be introducing the panelists in just a couple minutes and just explaining the format of our discussion. And as you recall, at the June meeting, Mayor Brooks requested that the Commission conduct a comprehensive study of litter. And after a discussion in which the members clarified that the study was not to focus on a bottle deposit or on plastic bags, the members voted to add the litter study to the work program. We'll present an update on the study at the January 2022 meeting. We will present the draft report at the fall 2022 meeting and the final report at the January 2023 meeting. And as an introduction to the topic today, we'll hear from these stakeholders here who have knowledge and experience with the issues. And to help facilitate this, so everyone's up here, so that's great, almost. Each person will have about 5 minutes for their remarks. After the first 3 panelists, each person will have 5 minutes for their remarks, and there'll be plenty of time for questions and discussion with each panelist. If possible, we ask that you save your questions until after the panelists have had a chance to speak. And one panelist, Missy Marshall, will use PowerPoint slides, and you have those slides in your docket books behind tab 6. So I'll go ahead and introduce our panelists now. We have Sean Bible, Transportation Manager with the Tennessee Department of Transportation Highway Beautification Office. Then we have Missy Marshall, Executive Director of Keep Tennessee Beautiful, and Rich Fogue, President of Tennessee Malt Beverage Association. Missy, Janet Boscarino has joined us. Thank you, Janet, with Clean Memphis. And Mike Butler, Chief Executive Officer of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and we're expecting Mayor Ketron from Rutherford County as well. So I'll go ahead and turn it over to you, Mr. Chairman, and our panelists. Thank you very much for being here.
And which will, Ms. Bible, we'll turn it over to you.
Yes, sir. I'm so pleased to have, yes. Oh. Do I get a green button?
She doesn't have a red button here.
It's red right there. Is it up? Is it working now? We want the red. Now it's working. Sorry. I'm pleased to have this opportunity to talk trash with you. And everyone in the beautification office is excited to participate in the study and have the opportunity to spotlight the valuable hard work so many of our local and statewide partners accomplish every year. This study comes as TDOT is expanding our existing litter grant funding to reach new partners in critical need areas, and as new elements of our Nobody Trashes Tennessee, the state of Tennessee's official litter prevention campaign are introduced. We coordinate and support so many important pickup and prevention programs, and I want to tell you about as many of them as I can. My original speech listed them all, and my staff said, no, that's too much. So I'm going to try to hit the highlights. But this is not a piecemeal effort. We do a lot of things, but because of the hard work and coordination of beautification staff, our county litter grant partners, our KAB affiliate partners, the hard work of Keep Tennessee Beautiful, and our thousands of volunteers, we have a strong and vital network. We actively communicate, we meet, and we work together for a clean and beautiful Tennessee. Having said that, litter is a terrible problem in Tennessee, and COVID has increased the problem. Litter is a drag on economic development. It hurts the environment. It's a safety problem for motorists. It hurts tourist development. It devalues recreation, and it hurts the profound pride Tennesseans have in their beautiful state. As one of the leaders of Tennessee's comprehensive statewide litter prevention and reduction program, it pains me to say that. I can tell you that as a part of our coordinated approach, we've scientifically and professionally measured roadside litter in 2006 and again in 2016, and we have reduced litter by 43%. And as I drove from my office downtown to Nolensville Road yesterday, you can hardly believe it because the litter was so bad. So I'm in no way negating how bad it is, but since 2006, we have reduced litter by 43%. Even so, we have a huge job to make Tennessee the clean and green state we want to see and always envision in our imaginations. I'd like to tell you a little bit about what we are actually doing in our vision for the future. TDOT's litter prevention program is funded through a self-imposed tax on the malt beverage and soft drink industries. And income from that tax is it varies, but it is growing a little bit all the time. It's between $5.5 and $6.5 million each year. The $19 million that TDOT talks about happens when you add in TDOT's contracted litter pickup along roadways, and that's frightfully expensive. The $5.5 to $6.5 million for prevention is really a modest amount of funding compared to the size of the problem, but the Beautification Office makes a serious effort to leverage and multiply those funds through volunteers and extensive statewide partnerships. Pre-COVID, hundreds of thousands of volunteers participated each year in litter prevention programming statewide. Litter grant funds are distributed through a grant to each of Tennessee's 95 counties based on population and road miles. Litter grant also funds the Keep Tennessee Beautiful program at the University of Memphis, and they serve as Tennessee's Keep America Beautiful affiliate and our education arm and our volunteer program recruiter for TDOT. The TDOT Beautification Office has active partnerships with nonprofits, businesses, local governments, and state departments, including TDEC, Agriculture, Tourist Development, Economic Development, Health Department, some of our programs. Of course, we have those 95 grants to all our counties, and they are required to spend between 20 to 35% on litter prevention education. The rest goes to pickup, but they have to do, if we don't educate folks, it's just going to keep being out there. We have special grants to various government entities and nonprofits, and they've funded everything from removal of illegal dumps, new trails at state parks made of ground-up tires. We're pretty excited about that. And the tires came from that area. We got the tires in that area. We ground them up and put them back in the park on the trail. That was a fun partnership with TDEC. We have litter education for driver's ed classes. We've done litter traps or seines on several different creeks and rivers at Marina that just plain blocks the litter from going into the bigger waterway. We had a larger grant, in fact, to Janet Boscarino down here to help fund summer youth litter cruise in Memphis, which was, I would have told you that wouldn't work, and it was an amazing success. We have a brand new microplastic water pollution exhibit at the Tennessee Aquarium we funded. I hope you can go and see it. We partner with many Tennessee colleges and sports teams. The Department of Agriculture has recently sent Smokey the Bear to help us talk about cigarette litter in the woods on social media. So we had our Trash Squatch mascot and Smokey the Bear They'll be on everything from Instagram to Snapchat, talking about cigarette litter and the problems with the litter aspect of it and the fire starting aspect of it. The Beautification Office manages the statewide Adopt a Highway program, and we also sponsor a litter hotline, 8778-LITTER, where citizens can report littering from vehicles. As a part of the research we did, we also surveyed Tennesseans and held focus groups to determine their attitudes about litter and understand the best way to present a litter prevention campaign. In particular, we listened and heard from the 18 to 34-year-olds because they're our number one litter bug, and that's pretty much true nationally. And the most profound thing we found out is about how much they appreciate and recognize the beauty of Tennessee. It was really kind of amazing. Many of the participants specifically said right at the first, and they didn't really know what we were going to talk with them about, said they'd moved to Tennessee because of the beauty of the state, and those that were natives were unanimous in their pride in the beauty of the state. And so we planned our campaign based on that pride. So Nobody Trashes Tennessee shows the beauty of Tennessee against the ugliness of litter. But when we spoke to these young people, to me, we found out they loved this beauty. They had no clue we said, well, how much do you think it costs to pick up litter in Tennessee? And several of them said, well, $10,000, $20,000. No clue. And then we said, there's 100 million pieces of litter on the roadsides at any one time. And they sort of flipped out. And they instantly, without any direction, started talking about, what can we do about it? So our campaign is based on that. I saw the light in their eyes. They just don't know. We're informing them, and they love the beauty of Tennessee. Because of this age group that we're targeting, we're much more social media oriented, and the tone of our campaign is slightly smarty. We're the government, we can't be too smarty, but this age group does not want a very, very old Keep Tennessee Beautiful campaign was pretty please, clean Tennessee now. We can't have that kind of campaign now. We've got to talk to the 18 to 34-year-olds. We are recruiting Generation Z to help us form and start this movement, and millennials to join in and help. We're piloting programs that with increased funding we could grow across the state. Currently, we're working on paid cleanups on pre-chosen routes for nonprofits and community groups, so they would be able to earn funding for their nonprofit while picking up specific miles of litter. We particularly think this would be great in our more underserved and rural areas where it's just hard for nonprofits to raise money. So we get the litter picked up and we help the nonprofits too. We also believe that enforcement is the next frontier for litter prevention in Tennessee, and we're working on incentives and training for law enforcement. We've done some of that in the past, but with more funding we could really hit it a lot bigger. I know Missy has done some of those sorts of things. TDOT's litter prevention efforts have evolved since I arrived at TDOT. When I arrived 17 years ago, there was no work on litter associated with water. As TDOT has become more committed to water quality, so did the litter program. We clean up canoe launches. We partnered with Living Lands and Waters. I mentioned the Aquarium. And we now have the very first Keep America Beautiful affiliate in the nation dedicated to a specific clean river. Keep the Tennessee River Beautiful. And I wish Kathleen Gibby, their head, was here today because she is a dynamo and is picking up tons of litter out of the Tennessee River. There are new frontiers in litter all the time, and we're ready. We're paddling a big boat. We're always interested in more and different partners, and we want folks to jump in and join us. We are always ready to partner.
Thank you very much, Vice Chairman Brooks.
Thank you, Chairman. Ms. Bible, thank you for coming and interested in this discussion, as you can imagine. The one quote or the statistic that I made a note of, the 43% reduction in litter in the state of Tennessee. We asked the presenter yesterday about the quantification of that. How did you, I do not have a 43% reduction in litter in Bradley County, so how did you quantify and come to that percentage point?
We studied we took the grouping of all Tennessee roads They used statistics to make sure they surveyed every kind of road and enough of that kind of road that it would be a statistically viable response. They sent troops of people out there and picked up litter, took it to a warehouse, counted and weighed and measured the litter. And then this last study, very interestingly, also, I guess quantified works, quantified the areas, what was around the litter. So we had, strangely, some things you could guess. Maybe there would be more litter around fast food areas. But there was also more litter near hardware stores, and that was statistically viable. So we also measured we did some brand measuring of the litter. So we hired a nationally qualified statistical science firm to go out and measure. And we did that in 2006, and we did that in 2016. And between those years, there was a 43% reduction. Now,
So 6 to 16.
yes, sir, COVID has
I was
hit
just about to say,
litter.
anecdotally, we are hearing in my community, I can't speak for all the other mayors, but for some reason, there seems to be a COVID uptick in litter.
Well, part of it is because so many folks that take prisoners out have not been able to put prisoners all in vehicles together and take them out, and that they did not want to get them out of their cell or wherever they are to go out. And so there's been a huge reduction in the litter pickup that we normally see.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
There's no objection. I have a question, but I'll yield to the mayor. I just wanted to ask you about, do you offer or require training for your litter grant coordinators? I've noticed that, or I've made an impression that the county program is about as strong as the coordinator is. And,
I think you're
and
exactly right.
I think there's some counties have stronger programs than others. So do you mandate any type of training for your coordinators?
Yes, sir, we do. We bring our county coordinators in yearly, and we require them to attend. And in addition, 2 years ago, and then again, we're in October. In October, it'll be virtual. Because we particularly have some county coordinators that are better at the education portion. I think the education part takes a little more finesse than the pickup. And so we have counties that are really good at pickup, but maybe not as good as education. So 2 years ago, we held a litter summit and invited all the education coordinators or the county coordinator to come in and hear a lot of stories about best practices. We had our counties that were doing the best jobs present, and then I worked for 14 years as the litter education coordinator at Metro Nashville, so I have a real heart for that stuff. So we also presented just some things we'd learned from Keep America Beautiful or from our histories that we thought would be positive ways to educate students, educate businesses, educate the public. And we're going to do it again in October, but virtually.
Thank you. Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Bible, for everything that you do. I know sometimes it's easy for us to see issues and complain about them and not appreciate the work that has gone on before, and I don't want you to think, by the nature of any of my questions, I don't appreciate everything you and the others are doing. Yet, knowing we were going to talk about litter, I paid particular attention on my drive over on I-40 from Knoxville yesterday and counted hundreds upon hundreds of tire pieces. Is that what they call road gator? But virtually every mile there would be chunks, large chunks of truck tire along the side of the road, and I couldn't help but wonder who's responsible, right? Does TDOT have a crew of people that go out and pick up these tires? Because it's really not, we'll talk about the volunteers, but that's really not, we don't need volunteers out on the interstates, right? So what is TDOT doing to help remedy what is obviously a situation that we have on our interstate highways?
That is TDOT's responsibility. The number one thing we do, 12 million of that 19 million is spent on contracted litter pickup. And I'm sorry, we contract that with our mowing contracts. We have recently, as COVID has happened, we have recently upped our number of pickups. So we're actually unbelievably picking up more than we were 5 years ago. And the problem's 440. Oh my goodness, it looks so bad. When we studied both times, the preponderance of the type of litter that was picked up was car debris and tires. So that is, and I don't quite yet have my head around how we can educate folks to not have that happen. Some of that, a molding falls off your car, on the interstate, what's going to happen? So we contract to pick it up. We're trying to do some innovative things too. We're contracting with the counties if they want to take that on and try to pick it up. And so then we are actually contracting with the counties, and they're using some prisoners too. We actually have a lot of dedicated TDOT employees in our district offices that want their county roads to look good. And they also, when they have time, take litter crews out and pick up too.
I'll be candid, one of my frustrations with TDOT is I believe they place way more priority on new construction and way too little priority on stewardship of what we've already have. And is there any likelihood that TDOT will take a look at that and say maybe if among our funding priorities, we should dedicate more of our money to stewardship activities, not just filling potholes, but picking up the litter and the trash, particularly along our interstate. So really, that's, that probably ought to be a TDOT coordinated activity.
Well, the budget part of that is definitely over my pay grade. But I can tell you, I walked into the building with Paul Deggs the other day, and the first thing he said to me, Sean, is I'm trying to plan for this CARES money, and I'm thinking increased litter pickup. So he has a heart. In fact, I'm sorry, I just think he's the greatest guy in the world, so it's hard for me not to sound like that. But he has a huge heart for the maintenance and the look of our roadways, and he does care, and he is thinking about that.
And the other issue we have is overgrown right-of-ways tend to foster more litter.
Yes, absolutely.
Right, when they drive by and they see the grass knee-high, it just seems like it's easier to toss your Chick-fil-A cup out the window.
And that's true. Science and statistics say that exact same thing.
And
I was so disappointed in the mowing on 440 this week. I went straight back to the mowing coordinator has the office next to me. It's just a fluke. And he I don't even know if I'm actually supposed to say this, but 440 looks that way because we have a bad contractor, and we are going to fix it. So some of that, we have our eye on that. The fellow next to me cares immensely, and we take all those calls and we try to course correct. In fact, the word is that we are in the next round of contracting going to increase the mowing on 440, and I know we're going to fix the way it looks because I live next to it and it looks hideous.
and
Exit 20.
And the reality is, in Louisville, we do it, right? I want our right-of-ways to be mowed and clean, and it helps us see when we need to coordinate our litter pickup efforts. But at some point, if that burden is going to shift to municipalities, then the funding, we shouldn't have to do it out of our local funds. It seems so. Perhaps the state, if they can't, right, if they're having issues, they can't find contractors, right? One solution would be to let the cities of Cleveland and Louisville and the other municipalities across the state just pay us to do it, because the reality is we have to answer to the people who complain about how the right-of-ways look.
And I believe we do some of that.
Okay.
I'll concur, Mayor, and there is a contract, our Public Works mows it, and then we bill you
Yes, sir.
back.
Yes, sir.
But we don't do it on a regular basis because we're so busy with all the other right-of-ways.
And I've got one more question, and I'm going to direct it to you because you're the only state representative we have. Louisville is a lakefront community. We've got multiple TWRA accesses where people can launch their watercraft. The number one eyesore, litter bug, trashiest looking place in our cities are the TWRA access ramps. It's so bad, in fact, I threatened to sue them for a nuisance. So what can we do? And I know it's not, but you're the only person from the state of Tennessee that I can express my frustration to
Actually,
today.
that's the kind of thing I work on all the time. If you know to call me, I try to pull together, I mean, see, to me, I won't go back, I'm gonna call TWRA and say, let's partner up on this. And then I'm gonna call my county coordinator, and then I'm gonna call my TDOT district guy, and I'm gonna talk to all of them about getting a focus onto that. And part of that is, I'm not sure I can make them clean it up all the time, but oftentimes when people become actually physically aware of the problem, they've seen it and they've tried to pick it up, then they're going to want to return and continue. I mean, that is what I do. I can't do it for, thank goodness everybody doesn't call me because I can't do it for everybody, but we're the liaison that tries to pull everybody, and there is a troop of folks across the state that want Tennessee to be clean.
Well, thank you. You should expect a call from me.
Good,
Because that
good,
way I can stop fussing at TWRA
I'll be
about
glad to
being a
talk
litter
to you
bug.
about it. And I'm glad you're gonna call me because I won't have a senior moment and forget, so
Okay.
let's talk.
But again, thank you very much
Yes,
for answering my questions and for being here today. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
On our list of panelists. Oh, Mayor?
Sean, thank you for that great presentation.
Thank you.
That was very enlightening. Excuse me, I'm very interested in the tires that you mentioned. That seems to be a huge problem around us. For some reason, people collect tires
It's terrible.
and they don't know what they're going to do with them. And of course, they create problems with mosquitoes and other things that you don't want in your community. And then plastic bags just flying all over the place. I'm interested to find out how you all worked with TDEC on the tires, because we don't seem to have an answer for that. And is there anything being done about the plastic bags? I know that some of them probably come out of the garbage trucks, you know, when they pick up the garbage, but they are everywhere and just seem to go from one place to another.
Because tires are such a terrible problem, we have gotten involved. It's an interesting situation in that TDOT is not responsible for the ultimate disposal of tires. TDEC handles all that money and all that program. But because our county litter grant partners had, just as you're talking about, such tire problems, and they could spend their entire grant on tires, and we wanted the roads cleaned up too. So we started to get involved, and we have tried to work. TDEC was working on a project to help some of the tire recycling grinding up firms get better equipment. You have to have it ground up small enough to do certain things with it. The most important things, you have to have it really small, and that's hard. So we pulled together all the groups that we work with that could possibly organize, and had a huge meeting to help them organize feeding their tires to these companies once they got this new equipment, so that they would have, you know, if they got the new equipment and could pay for it, they had to have the supply of tires. So we work on the front end of the tires, trying to help folks dispose of them, store them, collect them up. I mentioned we did the tire grinding up project. So we're not the leaders in tires, but we try to come behind and help and partner with TDEC when we can.
Are there several throughout the state that grind these up, or how do you get your tires to them?
I'm not sure I know that answer. There's two big companies, Liberty and Patriot, that take the tires and grind them up. I did want to mention, and I didn't say anything about it, the biggest project we've done, plastic bags are, and because my background is in trees, I particularly hate those plastic bags up in trees. And in fact, have some grabbers so I can go around my neighborhood and get them down out of the trees. We did a statewide coordinated giveaway of reusable bags, recycled material reusable bags with over 400 grocery stores, distributed over 1 million reusable bags. We called in all our county partners and our Keep America Beautiful affiliate partners to come in and table. So we didn't just hand you a bag, we educated you about the opportunities in the area to pick up litter and help a cleanup or schedule your own cleanup, and kind of coordinated the whole thing. So that's one of the things we've done. We push reusable bags and not those single-use bags.
Is there anything being done with the, with school children? Because yesterday, you know, they talked about health, and the best way to start is with the children. So
Yes,
many times they're the ones that educate the
almost all our
parents.
county partners are doing school programs. That's my background. Litter grant funds are paying for school programs everywhere, and we're as I mentioned, we're helping to educate our education coordinators so that the school programs are top notch, so the kids are getting the message. And then others of our partners, Janet Boscarino has amazing school programs teaching children about litter prevention, and we help fund her office. All our Keep America Beautiful affiliate partners, there's more than 30 of those. Those are in addition to our county partners. They're all educating school children too. And our special litter grants have funded several different school programs. We're super excited to do more litter prevention education in driver's ed and for new car owners and that sort of thing, and give permanent kind of litter bags for folks that buy a new car. We have a lot. That's one of our new ideas. So.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman, and I promise I will be brief. I will follow up, as Mayor Bickers did, with Ms. Bible as our only representative of our friends here in the state organization. Mine is not with TWRA. Mine is actually with TDEC and your need for partnership. I will be calling you. I just wanted to not have a senior moment myself, but we invited you all for a tire tour in Cleveland on August the 9th.
And Michael McClanahan is here in
And he did a great job.
Here in the audience.
It is September the 16th, and it's barely been 6 weeks. TDEC has already cited and notice of violation to the owner of the property that the TDEC didn't even know the tires were there. They're putting liens on their property. We invited them to come to Cleveland to help us. I now have people that are in a desperate situation simply because we said we need your help. So I'm going to be calling you after the meeting to try to help us figure this out. I want to join Mayor Holland. We need some tire grinding, but we also need some cooperation with our friends here at the state. We didn't create this problem. We're seeking solutions to clean it up. And somehow, someone has gotten that confused with citations and violations. So, thank you, Ms. Bible, for being here.
But TDEC, not TDOT.
That is correct. But I hope you can find their number.
Mayor Frank, you're recognized.
Yes, thank you, Sean. I'm an active believer and participant in your litter grant program, so thank you for
Yay,
that.
thank you.
We just did a TARPIT program event, and
Love those. Didn't mention those.
Yes. You mentioned in your presentation that the next frontier is enforcement, and I'm a believer in education. But after being in office for 9 years and this being the #1 call that comes to my office, what are you looking at in terms of enforcement? What would you need to see? I mean, there are repeat offenders out there
We
without
want
it.
tickets written. We want fines enforced. One of our founding fathers, Judge Larry Potter out of Memphis, really believed he believed that lower fines would be more used and the judges would give them. that they wouldn't give a $5,000 fine necessarily, but they would, for these smaller offenders, give the smaller fines. So he helped get the law changed to smaller fines. We want our officers to give these fines. We think it often leads to other kinds of discovery of other criminal activity, and is an important tool for the police. And then we want the judges to back it up. We have that happening in some counties, but not very many. We are studying, and Missy May can talk a little bit more about this. We are studying what some other states are doing with incentives and grants to police forces and trooper forces so that they can do these sorts of programs. When we surveyed folks about litter behavior, a certain percentage, I don't remember exactly, but a certain percentage straight out said, we're not going to do it unless we think we're going to get a ticket. We're not going to quit littering unless we know we're going to get a ticket. And so to reach those folks, and we'd really like to be able to say the message, litter and it's going to cost you, litter and it's going to hurt, you know, some of those messages, but we can't say those messages if nobody's giving the tickets. So.
Thank you. There are no other questions for the panelists, and I'll move us to the next one on our calendar, Rich Folk, who is the president of the Tennessee Malt Beverage Association. And I would say, too, those of us who are, those who are watching us on the internet are telling us, asking us to, everybody speak into your mic because it's hard to hear sometimes if you look away from your mic as you speak. Rich?
My name is Rich Folk, president of the Tennessee Malt Beverage Association, an organization of Tennessee's beer wholesalers. I'd like to thank Chairman Yeager and the TACIR Commission for the opportunity to participate in today's litter panel. I'd also like to thank David Lewis and Jennifer Barry, the TACIR researchers I met with a few weeks ago. They were very professional, very thorough, and a pleasure to work with. Fighting litter is nothing new to Tennessee's beer and soft drink industries. In 1981, representatives of the beer and soft drink industries supported legislation to add an additional tax to our products to fight all sources of litter. That legislation created the Litter Grant Program, which to this day, as you heard, is doing great work in our state battling litter. Currently, the Tennessee Malt Beverage Association and the Beverage Association of Tennessee, the soft drink guys, are working with a coalition of businesses and business organizations on ways to further combat litter and dumping in Tennessee. This coalition is organized under the guidance of the Tennessee Chamber of Commerce and Industry, and our stakeholders include the Tennessee Grocers and Convenience Store Association, Anheuser-Busch Companies, Tennessee Scrap Metal Dealers, Tennessee Retailers Association, the Tennessee Fuel and Convenience Store Association, the National Federation of Independent Businesses, and many other organizations that represent businesses that make Tennessee home and employ thousands of Tennesseans. Reducing litter is not a new concept. There's no silver bullet. There's no one solution that will solve the litter problem. It takes a lot of hard work and consistency from everyone. That's why we're proud of the accomplishments and the long-term commitment we've made for the last 40 years in the Litter Grant Program and fighting litter. Our coalition wholeheartedly supports the efforts of the Tennessee Department of Transportation's Litter Grant Program. Again, the Litter Grant Program began in 1982 and is funded by a tax on beer and soft drinks sold in Tennessee. The program, now coming up on its 40th anniversary, is a comprehensive, one-of-a-kind, award-winning program which is often looked to as a national model for workable litter control and prevention. The program is not just about picking up litter, but also focuses on education, trying to change the mindset and behavior of people not to litter. Excuse me. We welcome this comprehensive TACIR study of litter and dumping and appreciate that the Commission clarified that this study was not to focus on bottle deposits. While the bottle bill taxes are not what this is about, please allow me a minute to address that topic, as the bottle deposit tax program is the central component of the Clean Act bill proposed last legislative session and referenced to the TACIR research plan, referenced in the TACIR research plan, as one of my member calls me on the phone here. He's not watching, apparently. Currently, there are only 10 states with bottle bill deposit programs. There were 11 until Delaware dropped theirs some years ago. There are no bottle deposit tax states in the entire Southeast, and no state has passed a bottle bill program since Hawaii in 2002, nearly 20 years ago. Bottle bill programs create a large, new government bureaucracy requiring significant oversight. They are expensive because the system to collect and process the containers is so inefficient. A 10-cent deposit tax on beverage containers in Tennessee would amount to an estimated tax on Tennesseans of $500 million a year. Bottle bills jeopardize existing community recycling programs by removing the most profitable items, the aluminum cans and the PET plastic. Bottle bill states constantly battle fraud, with non-deposit beverage containers from other states being redeemed and redemption locations exaggerating the number of deposit containers that they've redeemed. Imagine the fraud that would occur in Tennessee with a bottle deposit tax, where we are bordered by 8 states that do not have bottle bill programs. Finally, the Clean Act usurps legislative authority and creates an independent commission with unlimited taxing and regulatory authority with no oversight or transparency. Tennessee is fortunate that we have a well-established, award-winning program to remove litter and educate our citizens against litter. The Litter Grant Program and Keep Tennessee Beautiful together have established a structure that provides a comprehensive pathway to eliminating litter through volunteer pickup programs and anti-litter education. They have developed valuable partnerships over the years that allow them to leverage the litter grants into far greater achievement. We have a very successful litter program here in Tennessee. We should not disparage it. Instead, we should build on their accomplishments and amplify the program. Our Business Litter Coalition is committed to finding more solutions to litter, and we've started the process of talking to Tennesseans and Tennessee companies to find the best solutions for the next several decades. We stand ready to assist TACIR as they continue their research into the litter issue, and we look forward to working with the legislature on ways to improve efforts in fighting litter in Tennessee. And just as a final note, I believe the recent edition of the Tennessee Beer Tax Facts was distributed to the Commission. This includes information on the Litter Grant Program, and it also highlights that Tennessee does, in fact, have the highest beer tax rate in the country by far. The primary reason for this is the local wholesale beer tax, which is not a state-shared tax, but instead is mandated by state law, and the wholesaler, the beer wholesaler, pays that tax directly to the city or county where we sell the beer to a retailer. In calendar 2019, that was $134 million statewide to Tennessee's cities and counties. Thank you for your time.
Are there any questions for the panelist? Mayor?
I don't know if this is it's kind of a question statement, but you talked about $135 million to the locals. When you divide that out, all of the counties and then down to the municipalities, you're looking at 500-600 entities. That's not a lot of money when you take it that way for each of those individual municipalities in order to accomplish what's just been talked about, and that is the ability to have enough police force to enforce the litter ordinances and laws. So I would just, as we fill this out, as we flesh this out, I just want to, a lot of times we can sit at a state level and throw out some really big numbers to an individual. If I had $135 million, I'd be okay. But when you divide that out amongst these different agencies, that's just really not that much money in terms of our ability to handle the litter caused by the cans and bottles, et cetera, that are being tossed out the windows. So anything that you'd have to say to that or thoughts, but I just want us to keep these big numbers in perspective of where the uses go.
I'll give you another big number. The state beer tax generates about $17 million a year consistently. Beer sales don't fluctuate that much. The city of Nashville receives $20 million from the local wholesale beer tax a year. And again, that doesn't go through the state. That's paid monthly by the beer wholesalers doing business in Nashville. Sorry, Mayor, I don't know what city you're mayor of.
Bartlett, Tennessee.
Bartlett, if you don't mind, real quick, I'm just curious to see what Bartlett gets from the beer tax, and this will just take a second. So Bartlett in calendar 2019 received $732,000 from the beer tax. And that, again, that's no strings attached general fund money to the city of Bartlett. So I mean, I don't know, I don't run a city, and I have a lot, you know, you got a lot of things to pay for, but just on our product alone, that's, I mean, $730,000 is a pretty good amount of beer from just beer sales in your city.
It is, but it goes for things in addition to litter. There are a lot of other things, economic development, where we can bring those kind of businesses that sell your products in and have them be successful, comes out of that money as well.
Well, that's the beauty of the tax. I mean, the more beer you sell, the more tax revenue it generates, but the tax that funds the litter grant program comes out of the state tax. Again, the tax that you get off beer sales goes directly to you for you to do as you please.
Right, but when you look at the different things it has to be used for, the public safety piece, the drunk driving aspects of things that we have to deal with, and the education on those things, it just doesn't go as far as it sounds to an individual when all of those things are considered. So I do want to flesh it out. I do want to be fair about it. I don't want to just argue the point. I want us to find a solution to it, and I just thank you for your reaction to that.
Thank you.
Mayor Brooks, you're recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Fogg, thank you. I've got to begin by thanking Ms. Berry for the memo that clearly addressed that after a discussion, it was clarified that this study is not to focus on a bottle deposit or plastic bags. It's in the memo. So as we begin this discussion and as we begin this litter study, and I'm thankful because I joined Mayor McDonald, the municipality of Cleveland doesn't receive a dime of this litter grant, sadly. We do receive beer tax, but the litter, which is what we're discussing today, is a problem. Your response to Mayor McDonald was, let me give you a big number. Well, the biggest number in the room is we're 47th in the nation on lack of recycling and litter and cleaning this state up. And I'm a huge proponent of the TDOT, Don't Trash Tennessee. I'm a huge proponent of all of these things. But as Mayor McDonald said, this is not working. There are some states that have great programs that seem to be working. But clearly, the reason that we're here today and the reason I'm so thankful that we're able to do a deep dive is something systemically is not working. Or we wouldn't have the tires on a 40, and we wouldn't have the trash in Bartlett, and I wouldn't have the problems that I'm having in Cleveland, trying to figure out how do we get this solved. Thank you, Mr. Fogg, for coming.
Well, I agree. And we're working with a group under the chamber. We'd like to see more resources put into the existing framework. We think it's a good one. In a sense, it's still working on 1980 money. I mean, as again, you know, beer sales increase slightly with population, but, you know, it's drinking habits are pretty static. So we agree. I wanted to point out that the burden that's already on our product with the highest beer tax in the country is one of the reasons, and the locals benefit greatly from that. I wasn't suggesting that, you know, that would pay for the litter. I was just making the point that we pay a good deal already, and we do pay into the litter program. And I think expanding what we have and looking for more resources to build on this program, and you hear what Sean Bible's saying, there's a lot being done. It's comprehensive, and I think they need additional resources. So I agree.
Mayor,
Just
you're recognized.
briefly, now in Louisville, we like our beer. Be no mistake about that. And we appreciate every penny we get from the wholesale beer tax. But I would suggest, and for folks to think about, that the reason that there appears to be zero interest in a bottle tax in Tennessee is because there is because there is money like the wholesale beer tax that is going to municipalities and counties, and that perhaps the best way to make sure that that attitude stays the same is to not talk about let's ratcheting back the dollars that are available used for litter pickup and other litter programs that we have in our cities. But let me reiterate, we like beer in Louisville, and we appreciate every penny that we receive. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And I think before I want to offer one comment about law enforcement or enforcement of laws. From my conversations with some of your policemen and our deputies in local government is, I don't know if that the issue is as much that we don't have enough deputies to get the job done or policemen. It's frankly, maybe we need to look at the statutes, the litter laws in this state, which are really candidly maybe a slap on the wrist. That's what I hear, and some of the officers that I talk to say, you know, why go to the effort to ticket someone because we're not ever going to get it through General Sessions Court? I mean, that we in this study we need to look at the law on that and maybe tighten it up a little bit. But that is for this body, our staff to look at, and then we'll have a chance to look at it when they come bring it back to us. But I hear that comment. And on that note, Missy Marshall is the Executive Director of Keep Tennessee Beautiful. We're delighted you're here and anxious to hear what you have to say.
On. Okay, it wasn't on. Thank you,
go.
Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Missy Marshall, and I have the pleasure of serving as the Executive Director for Keep Tennessee Beautiful, as well as the State Leader for Keep America Beautiful. We are a program, a grant-funded program within the University of Memphis. We are housed in the College of Professional and Liberal Studies and under the Dean of U of M Global. The way that we're structured is actually one that is unique. When you look at other states and who have state affiliates, they're structured very differently. In each state, it's different. It could be a foundation. It could be within the Department of Tourism. I always like to give a little bit of a background as to how did we end up at the University of Memphis. And I have to say that back in the 80s that Mr. Rich spoke of when this movement, this Clean Tennessee movement began, it was led by pioneers in the Memphis and West Tennessee area, and one being Judge Larry Potter. Larry Potter's considered the father of the environmental courts. He has helped establish at least 7 environmental courts across the state. He established 2 environmental courtrooms in the county of Shelby. As you know, in Shelby County, where I reside, I'm also a resident and an alderman of Collierville, Tennessee. And Shelby County has a lot of litter, and we understand that. So when Larry Potter and a lady named Edith Heller, I actually sit as the 3rd executive director of this organization. It's done a lot of great work over the years. Prior to going to this organization, I spent 24 years in state government in various departments with various commissioners and governors. So I absolutely love this state. I grew up in Blount County, William Blount High School graduate, and the majority of my professional career was here in Nashville, and now home is West Tennessee. So when being a statewide organization and having to travel all 95 counties, and I think any of our affiliates and some of our mayors and county commissioners will tell you that if I get the call, I will come there. I have a team at the University of Memphis that helps us carry out our mission, and with that, I'll start my presentation. This is our team, and when I assumed the role in this organization, they had done a lot of great work over the years, and the challenge was there wasn't the way to get the information out, the story of what they were doing. And so one of the first things I was challenged with was besides building more affiliates, was to go in and do some professional development and structure the organization in a way that it would serve the entire state. So, and I inherited several of my team members, but grateful that I did because I couldn't do what I do without their support and the support of the affiliates. Pamela Willingham is our assistant director, and Steen Moss Cooperwood is our coordinator for community outreach. Edmund McDavis is our coordinator for affiliate services and training. Kyle Howard is our education and research coordinator, and Monica Kaiser helps us with communications and social media. So our mission at Keep Tennessee Beautiful is to educate and inspire people to take action every day to improve and beautify their community environment, because it does start with the people and it starts with that pride. And so we're hoping by educating and inspiring, it will inspire them to change their behavior. We accomplish our mission through 3 E's: education, engagement, and enforcement. And to just give you an example, the Nobody Trashes Tennessee campaign is the official litter prevention campaign, statewide litter prevention campaign. Our affiliates, our local Great American Cleanup coordinators, as well as litter grant coordinators, help get that message out. So we use the campaign to educate people. And then Keep Tennessee Beautiful and our affiliate network are the ones that are basically leading the call to action, coordinating volunteers across our state. And I think you all got, and I'll go through it fast because I know in the interest of time, you all got copies of this PowerPoint presentation that will have numbers in it as to how many hours of volunteer time is given each year, what the value of that volunteer time is. And then what are the results? What's the impact of that as far as how many pounds of litter is collected, how many illegal dumps are cleaned up, how many trees are planted. And so we do that through engagement. The third piece is enforcement. And I have a little bit to say about that. This is how we're structured. As the state leader, I also sit on the Keep America Beautiful National Board of Directors. And so, when first, that was an elected position by my fellow state leaders. So I take a lot of pride in representing our state on this level. And through the partnerships and the work of our affiliates, in 2020, we hosted the national conference in Memphis at the Peabody Hotel, and we also were awarded 6 national awards for the work that we do here. So here you can see a list of where our affiliates are. And when I assumed this role, you can see the majority of our affiliates are over in East Tennessee. The affiliate, the certification process to become a Keep America Beautiful affiliate, and some of you sitting up here are, and I'm going to recognize Mayor McDonald because I think he really saw the value in the programs. He attended and our conference is coming up next Wednesday, virtually. He attended one of our conferences, and at the TDOT KTMB Awards of Excellence, some of this funding that's distributed is also, it's not just to affiliates and it's not just to litter grant coordinators. It could be communities that have communication initiatives, engagement initiatives, and Mayor McDonald was at our conference, and he got up there and he said, "We're already doing all these things." He has a beautification board, and I will tell you, he's made it very clear you do not litter in Bartlett, or you will be ticketed and fined. And so he said, we're already doing these things, but we're not getting the credit, and we're not getting the corporate sponsorships that come with it. That's part of a benefit of being a KAB affiliate. So we grew more affiliates in the West Tennessee area just through exposure and telling our story and getting the word out. Most of the affiliates were in East Tennessee because if you're a tourist area, you see the value. You absolutely see the value in having a designated leader in your area coordinating this effort and getting volunteers to just instill that community pride, because it does. Keep America Beautiful is a behavioral change organization. We can talk about fines, we can talk about giving more money, but until we change people's behavior, we're still going to have a challenge. I'd love to work ourselves out of a job. I would absolutely love to it. But if you don't work on changing that behavior, you're not going to see results. Some of the programs that we use to educate and engage from the national level, and these are programs that your local communities can participate in, and they do not have to be a nationally certified Keep America Beautiful affiliate. You can sign up, organize a Great American Cleanup. We launch that in March of every year. In March is Keep Tennessee Beautiful Month. Former Governor Haslam started that here in Tennessee, and what we decided to do was some of our affiliates, like in Anderson County, that is our only affiliate that is 100% volunteer-based. And they do an excellent job, and they have been a recipient of some of the TDOT Awards of Excellence, which they actually had funding to go back into their community. The America Recycles Day, we encourage and promote this to help raise awareness about recycling. One thing that I did notice when I came to this organization that maybe Keep Tennessee Beautiful might have missed the beat just a little on recycling and getting the word out on recycling. But we do have a Tennessee Recycling Coalition that is made up of solid waste directors and various officials from across the state. And what I realized was we can't be all things to everybody. But if we can partner with organizations that will help us accomplish that mission and have like-minded missions, then we could have a greater impact in our state. And so that's what we choose to do with the Tennessee Recycling Coalition. So some of the grant funding that we get, and I'll touch on enforcement in just a few minutes, we actually use and help support our partners across the state, as well as, when we can, supplement our affiliates. The Cigarette Litter Prevention Program, this is a highly effective program. We have partnered with state parks, we have partnered with local affiliates, and what this program did at Keep America Beautiful, Keep Tennessee Beautiful, we were awarded the first year a $10,000 grant and then a $20,000 grant. And we partnered with our affiliate in Williamson County. We partnered with the parks, the Department of Tourism, because we worked in our welcome centers. And what we did is we saw that we went in and we did a scan for cigarette litter, which is one of the most littered items in our country. We'd do a scan, and we would see how many cigarette butts were on the property, what were we seeing and cleaning up. And then we come in and we put signage, and we put a receptacle up for people to put their cigarette butts in. And then we come back a period of time later and do another scan, and that's how we gauge, are we seeing a reduction in litter? And in every instance we did. In some cases we saw a 50% reduction in litter. And so this is a program that, like I said, you don't have to be an affiliate, just be engaged with Keep Tennessee Beautiful. And while we focus, and my main role is to prioritize and support our Keep America Beautiful affiliates, we work with all 95 counties and can come in and help if you've got a local leader to coordinate programs, whether it's cleanups or if you're not an affiliate, that's another service that we offer. Some of Keep Tennessee Beautiful programs, since coming on board, that was one of the things that I said, okay, how do we expand our reach? How do we improve our education efforts that would inspire people to change their behavior? And so some of the things that I was asked to, would I consider doing a coloring book? And so what I wanted was something that was more impactful. And the Nancy and Slogo Love Tennessee is a children's book, and it is based a lot off of the Tennessee Blue Book. We highlight our state animal, our state bird, our state flower, and it's a story, and it teach students on the importance of not littering, doing your part to clean it up when you see it, and then the things that you can repurpose. If you can repurpose and recycle, you're encouraged in this book. This book is an educational tool as well as a marketing tool as well as a fundraising tool. Saved by the Jeans is a program that we do. One of our staff, Monica Kaiser, had come up with this, and we went across. We started on the U of M campuses to collect jeans, and those jeans would go back and be recycled for insulation in Habitat for Humanity houses for another way to repurpose materials. Can You Dig This is National Planting Day that Keep America Beautiful. That was another outreach program that we do to engage citizens, and of course the Awards of Excellence that happens every 2 years. Trash size. So I mentioned that March is Keep Tennessee Beautiful month each year, and what we do is we kick off a Great American Cleanup, Keep Tennessee Beautiful month rally, if you will, and part of the reason for that was we have a lot of volunteer coordinators, Great American Cleanup coordinators. Anderson County was one of them. And we wanted a way to just show them appreciation because let's face it, picking up litter, cleaning up dump sites, it is not glamorous work. And it's not fun being called the trash lady or the hygiene queen, but I take it, I own it, I live it. Just so you know, my staff and I require them to participate in at least 3 cleanups a year because we're not going to ask people to do something that we're not willing to do ourselves. You have to lead by example. And so Trashercise was actually an idea of a gentleman in Williamson County out in Leapers Fork. He and his wife were headed to the gym one day and saw the litter along the roadway that led to their landfill. And they're like, you know, we're going to pay someone to work us out. We could probably go out there, get fit, give back. And it was a program that he started 15 years ago? I actually participated in it because I was a resident then. And so I called him up. This is intellectual property of the Leapers Fork Foundation. And I said, okay, we've been quarantined. And when we were quarantined, where were the 2 places that we could go? The grocery store, maybe the home improvement stores, and outside. And so when you go outside, what do you want to see? You want to enjoy the beauty of nature, and you don't want to be walking through trash. And so this was a way to engage citizens across the state, and we're still going. We're relaunching it in the fall because the goal is to Trashercise in all 95 counties. If you have not and you are interested, please get a hold of us. We will help you organize a Trashercise, and we will come Trashercise alongside you in your county or your community. And this is, you can refer to your packet and see just the impact we've had since we launched it in March. This was some of the exposure and the coverage and free advertising media that we got across the state in engaging citizens to come out, do their part. And once they do it, they see the impact on it. And while fines may or may not work, I'm of the belief that if you get out there and you make them clean it up, then they realize that it's not somebody else's job, and there's actually a consequence to their behavior. And once they have to get out there and actually clean up and pick up and help clean up illegal dump sites, it kind of hits home. So by the combination of our volunteers, our affiliates, and I have to say, none of this work could be done without the TDOT Litter Grant. And we're grateful for it. And states across the country actually look to us. We've had Virginia call us. We've had Ohio call us. There's not another state that has this comprehensive litter education, litter prevention program and set up that every county can participate in it. I've a couple of things that were mentioned, and I won't read all these to you because they're in your packet, but I'm happy to always talk about them. But I am very, very, very proud to talk about Keep the Tennessee River Beautiful. If you want to know the power and the impact of partnerships, a few years ago, so TDOT, when they have extra money in the litter grant, they will offer these special litter grants. And one of the grants that they offered was to clean up McKellar Lake. It was water quality. They wanted to focus on water quality. And so there was not an organization or an individual in Tennessee that could do what this organization did, which is called Living Lands and Waters. And they were awarded a special litter grant to organize a program in Memphis on McKellar Lake for college students. It's like an extreme spring break. The next year, the funding wasn't there. So they asked if I would partner with TVA and Living Lands and Waters and use some of my grant funding to fund a Tennessee River tour. At the end of that tour, the founder of Living Lands and Waters said, "Don't let it stop here. You've had such a great impact." And it covered all three E's. Well, two: education and engagement, not enforcement. But the barge had a classroom, and at each port, students came on. They learned about water quality and the impacts of litter and water. And so the TVA then gave us a grant that we worked through our foundation at the University of Memphis, and we incubated this program out of the Keep Tennessee Beautiful office with the goal of it becoming their own nonprofit, because, as you know, the river goes in more states than Tennessee. And to date, our director, her goal is 80,000 pounds of litter this year collected along the river. In a way, it's sad and inspiring. It's sad that we have to clean it up, but it's inspiring that people are coming together to help clean it up. And so her goal is 100,000, and they will meet it. The Keep Tennessee River Beautiful will meet it. On the area of enforcement, so during the quarantine, we were not able to get out and do some of the events that normally were funded by our grant. So I contacted TDOT and I said, and it was a short turnaround, but I said, would it be permissible for us to do a pilot project and work with the Tennessee Chief of Police Association to offer law enforcement grants to municipalities? Because all 95 counties, typically, in most 95 counties, I can't speak to all of them, but the Sheriff's Department does receive some of that grant funding. And it may fund an officer that oversees the inmates that go and help with the roadside cleanups where you can't get volunteers, or they may work at the convenience centers. But the municipalities they don't benefit from any of that funding. And law enforcement, to me, we do. Judge Potter came in 2012 to amend the current Tennessee litter law to put a little more teeth in it. But our officers, and I think you know this, they are overwhelmed with just their day-to-day, whether it is first responders, it's traffic accidents, it's domestic calls. And so I looked at the program, the Highway Safety Office program. You've heard of Click It or Ticket, Booze It or Lose It. And I said, if we could offer and expand some of our funding to the law enforcement in the municipalities, maybe they could do the same thing. They could maybe pay officers overtime to enforce in these areas. Covered loads is a huge problem in Tennessee. And I just don't believe people drive down the road and throw out toilets or mattresses or couches. I believe that a lot of our citizens are not aware of our Tennessee covered load law. And so another thing that we did was partnering with certain counties to do stand at convenience centers to give out tarps and a copy of the Tennessee covered load law. I'd love to see a message, cover your load or cover the cost, because it's a real problem, not just with aesthetically, it's a safety issue too. And so that's one of the things that we hoped to do with sharing our grant money. We had 16 police departments apply. Unfortunately, we only had enough funding to grant 8. But part of that agreement was if you do receive funding, then there was a $2,500 tier and a $5,000 tier. And the $5,000 had to agree to the litter law training. Kyle Howard and myself are both certified through the post accredited. So when we offer a litter law training, we can actually go into the departments where they don't have to send their officers, and their officers get that post credit for that training. So some of our upcoming events, I would absolutely love if you would tune in on Wednesday of next week. Will be our TDOT KTMB Awards of Excellence biannual conference. We're doing that virtually this year. Hopefully we'll be back to in-person at our next one. That's next Wednesday at 9 o'clock, and we can get more information to you. And then our Ready, Set, Grow is our outreach through KTMB, just to raise awareness, get people outside that love to be outside, and then share our mission as to why it's important not to litter and then to do your part. That's all I have.
Any questions? Questions? If there are none, then we will resume our presentations, and I believe the next panelist up will be Ms. Janet Boscarino, and I hope I've pronounced that correctly, who is the Executive Director for Clean Memphis.
Is my mic? Oh, yes, it is. Thank you, Chairman. Thank you for having me join you guys today. I appreciate the opportunity to serve along with you guys on this panel. My name is Janet Boscarino, and I'm the founder and executive director of Clean Memphis. We're an environmental nonprofit that works to educate and engage people in Memphis and Shelby County to sustain a cleaner Memphis. I spent about 20 years in business development before I started Clean Memphis, and had a epiphany when I was at a conference in Minneapolis, in downtown Minneapolis, and it was pristine, and decided when I got back home when it wasn't pristine that I wanted to do something to try to help improve that situation for people in Memphis and Shelby County. So the way we work, what we're working on in Memphis and Shelby County, we focus on education engagement. We have 3 full-time certified teachers on staff. I can't stress how important.
Excuse me, Ms. Boscarino.
Yes.
Do you mind pulling your mic just a little bit closer to your face here?
Yes.
So hear a little bit better. Thank you.
Is that better?
Yes, okay,
Okay, great.
I'm sorry
Thank
to
you.
interrupt.
No, absolutely. We have 3 full-time certified teachers on staff that provide in-class programming for K through 8 students, as well as high school environmental stewardship projects. I can't emphasize enough the value and role of education and engagement, and that we consider that investing in the future, so that students, we're building a culture in the school of environmental sustainability. So they understand their role in the environment, and it's grounded in civic engagement. We focus on source reduction, we look at waste diversion, we have water quality, all kinds of things that the students are involved in to really create a culture of sustainability at the school. We work in feeder patterns so that we hope to connect with those students throughout the life cycle of their education, and I think that's important. We have book clubs focusing on literacy. During the pandemic, when we were virtual, we had a second grade book club with 6 books that all focused on litter, waste reduction, food waste, a variety of topics, and had volunteer corporate readers that would come in and join the classroom, and we had activity guides. So continuing in any way we can to work with students to really ground them in environmental stewardship. We also launched a Sustainable Schools Challenge, where schools work on conservation issues and become certified locally. One of the things we do with communities is really try to help provide training for them. Some of our neighborhoods have code enforcement issues, and so really having them understand how to evaluate what code enforcement issues are out there, how to report those, how to organize cleanup projects. We serve as a connector in a lot of ways. We found that corporate partners wanted to have somewhere to volunteer, schools wanted to have projects in communities, and communities needed volunteer projects. So we serve as a connector of those groups in geographic spaces so that they can come together and address issues they have in their communities. We also provide, every year we work with TVA to purchase tool sets for communities so that they have weed eaters, blowers, trash grabbers, all kinds of things to help support ongoing cleanup efforts in their communities. One of the things that we've done this year, we purchased an app for the license for an app for Memphis and Shelby County called Literati. It's a free app. Anyone can download it. It uses artificial intelligence and machine learning. While you're doing a cleanup project, you photograph the litter, and it identifies it by type, plastic, aluminum, paper, and it also identifies it by brand. It geolocates it, and it timestamps it. All of this data rolls up to a dashboard for us so that we can analyze the material makeup of our litter, where it's located, the time of day, so that this data can help us determine better intervention and messaging strategies. And it also helps us understand how much of the litter on the ground is actually something that could be in our recycling system. So we're really looking forward to, we're starting, it's a citizen science project, so we're working with our community leaders, our students in schools, and our corporate partners to do data collection. And the city of Memphis has administrative seats on that, our public works folks, so they can see the data as it rolls in. We also worked on an RFP with the city of Memphis with Literati, and we're selected as one of 3 cities that will use Literati to look at illegal dump sites around Memphis and Shelby County, and they will be researching 50 linear miles, and will work with intervention strategies and use Literati to determine if we're making any type of progress. It's a great engagement tool, and it's a great way to use data to drive decision making. Another thing that we focus on is stewardship. So we do encourage adoption of blocks, adoption of parks, things like that with our local Keep America Beautiful affiliate, which is Memphis City Beautiful. One thing that we're launching, and I think this I've heard sort of everyone on the panel mention, the issue with the interstate system and exit ramps. So we're launching a pilot adopt and exit ramp project with 4 or 5 of our corporate partners in Memphis. And the idea there is that we currently have, I think, with TDOT taking care of our, with our interstate system, they have a certain number of mows that they have funding to do, right? It's like maybe 8 during the mowing cycle time or grass season. So the idea is that we are creating an opportunity for companies to adopt the exit ramp and fund additional mows and additional litter pickup. So we're rolling out a case study, doing about 5 of our exit ramps. One particularly large one at Poplar and 240, we have a company that's taking that over, and then we're going to focus on around the airport area, where we know we have interest from companies that we get complaints because there are lots of litter and they want the grass mowed more frequently. So we're going to take that up to 14 mows during that site, during the mowing season, and then an additional 52 litter pickups. And we've sort of priced that out, put it together in packages, and we worked really closely with TDOT to bring that online as a stewardship option. We need our exit ramps and interstate system to look like we're open for business, and right now they don't really look like they're open for business the way we need them to. So we're trying to close that funding gap between what's there, what the city can put in, and what the private sector can do to support. The other thing I wanted to talk about is just our push into the future and looking more into innovation. Memphis has not selected as of yet. It's in our comprehensive planning process to establish a circular economy goal for the city in Shelby County. And I think we can't really address litter without addressing waste. We're producing an enormous amount of waste, and litter is simply leakage from a broken solid waste system. We have to look at how we're dealing with waste in general. Someone mentioned plastic bags earlier. I think the important thing to look at there, we've tried taxes, that's not going to work. The research shows taxing bags you're going to leave 7 cents on your bill and not worry about it. It doesn't get away from them. I think we have a ban on a ban in the state of Tennessee for plastic bags. But what we do know is that Kroger's eliminating plastic bags by 2025. They already have some states where they're not using plastic bags anymore. I believe when we work with our corporate partners to encourage that type of behavior, I think we'll see other big box stores take that same initiative. Most all of our companies, I know there was a recent, I was at a circular economy conference recently where McKinsey and Company had done a study with CEOs, and 94% of them say that circular economy and sustainability are key important aspects of the future of their businesses. So you already see Coca-Cola running a campaign in Charlotte called Every Bottle Back. South Carolina, because they need feedstock for their plastics industry, they want plastic bottles, so they have a your bottle equals jobs. So I think we have to think about looking at our waste stream as an opportunity for economic development and job creation, and not just something we're having to focus on in terms of picking it up. If it has value, it's probably not going to be litter. I know in a lot of our neighborhoods, aluminum cans get picked up because they can put them all together and take them to the recycling center and get some money for them. So just thinking about that, we are working to really push for that waste characterization study and a regional solid waste plan for Memphis and Shelby County. One of the things we've already launched is our Memphis Food Waste Project. You've got probably 20% of municipal solid waste is food waste. So how can we reduce that? That helps. The burden of waste sort of lands on cities and municipalities, and we're looking to how we can reduce the amount of waste that municipalities are having to deal with. We only have about 20 years left on our landfill. I think Nashville is a more dire situation than us, so we have to transform our orientation to waste. We've already launched, we have helped 2 businesses connect to funding, one in North Memphis that will be opening a tire recycling facility. We were able to connect them with Epicenter in Memphis, which really is our entrepreneurial engine, to get funding for that center. So I'm hoping they'll be starting this fall, and we're working on connecting them with contracts on the back end so that they have someone to sell the material to. And we also are working with one of our community development corporations that has a job training program that is now taking mattresses and styrofoam, hard to recycle items, and they extract the air from styrofoam, and it makes this super hard material that they have someone to sell it to out of state that makes picture frames out of it. So it's those types of examples of really changing our orientation to waste and something that can benefit us in terms of jobs and economy. that I hope you guys will consider. And I know when I had my conversation with TACIR, they were very interested in circular economy as a part of how we address litter. And I think that's pretty much everything that I had to say. I mentioned I would look at, Arizona is very progressive in terms of circular economy. They had an issue with palm fronds, is something that was in their organic waste stream more than they can handle, and they found a business outside of town in another state that used palm fronds in pet bed, when they're making the pet beds, and they attracted them to the city, and now they've sort of addressed their issue and had job creation too. So just that innovation, I think we have to keep in mind as we're trying to solve this issue as well. Thank you.
Do we have questions for the panelists? Mayor?
Spell literati for me, please.
Litterati. It's free to download. Anyone can download it. By us buying a license, we can create challenges, and then residents join challenges, and all the data rolls up to us. We also have sub-licenses, so we're giving our park partners a license. We gave Memphis City Beautiful a license, our neighborhood leaders licenses, and they can create their own challenges. One thing I would say about messaging, it has to be hyper-local. Memphis is a city of neighborhoods, and if we do a Memphis, we did 901 Love Where You Live, and it was much more successful if we did 901 Love Where You Live Raleigh or 901 Love Where You Live Cordova. People just have a neighborhood connection, and so I think just in our messaging, we need to make sure that we're doing whatever we can do as locally as possible.
Thank you.
Mayor Holland?
You mentioned, I think it was Sean that mentioned the tire recycling companies, and then you mentioned the styrofoam recycling company, but it's out of state. And so does Tennessee have any incentives for any of these type of recycling companies to come here? Because it seems like that if we do have them, they're few and far between, or we're having to send these things out of state, and so they collect here.
Yeah, so the tire recycling center that I'm speaking of will actually recycle the material in-state. It'll do it in Memphis in their North Memphis facility, but they may sell the end product to anyone, right? So it will be, and also on the styrofoam, they have purchased the equipment to recycle the styrofoam into this other product that they sell out of state. So it will happen in Tennessee. I do think TDEC and also the Tennessee Department of Economic Development does have incentives for green type of businesses. So on the advisory council that we're pulling together in Memphis, we are pulling all of those people together. You know, we have an issue with waste. Our companies, FedEx, International Paper, Nike, they want a solution to waste. They have CRM goals that are they don't want to have waste. They are trying to get as close to zero as possible. So having all those people together to work on solutions is important. But to answer your question, I do believe there are incentives within TDEC. I know that one of the, from the recycling of tires, TDEC offers grants for that, for equipment. And then we were able to connect them with, as I mentioned, Epicenter to get financing for the facility and other materials that they needed for that. So those will happen in state, but I do think encouraging, making sure that Tennessee as a state is encouraging circular economy opportunities with funding opportunities through economic development as well.
Mayor Brooks?
Thank you, Chairman. I have clean envy. I wish the city of Cleveland could have a clean Memphis and a Janet. I do believe this public-private partnerships that you're talking about is incredibly important. You mentioned South Carolina, Coca-Cola, you mentioned Kroger. What is the connectivity between the state of Tennessee and our food cities and Coca-Cola bottlers and our in-state? You said FedEx, Nike, International Paper. What is that connectivity between government and the private sector? Because I do believe those public-private partnerships could be incredibly important going forward.
And that's why we're pulling together our advisory council to get those people in a room. I think it's, you know, when Charlotte did their waste characterization study, they had 5 things that came out of that for them to focus on. One was plastics, textiles, organics, and I can't remember what the other one was, but they looked around in their community and Coca-Cola was right there, and Coca-Cola is taking some, I know they were taking the plastics from to-go containers. We had this proliferation of to-go containers during the pandemic and still have it. They're taking those in and using them for car parts. They also had another business that was using those for kayaks. So I think it's understanding what's in our waste stream and who are our relevant partners that can help us do something with that. So it's really about bringing people together. It's getting those same people in a room and understanding what our issues are with waste and what their opportunities are. We work, our whole job in Memphis is to make connections and to collaborate. And so that's where I spend most of my time, is getting people together.
Thank you, Jen.
Thank you. Are there other questions for the panelist? If not, the next panelist on our list today is Mr. Mike Butler. He is the Chief Executive Officer of the Tennessee Wildlife Federation, and we're delighted you're here and look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And thank you to TACIR and to the board and the staff, Director Lippard, for putting this panel together. We think it's very timely, and it'll be very helpful overall. To kind of frame where we come to this issue as an organization, we have been following and interested in how to address litter since the 1970s. It is, we believe, a core effort of anybody that believes in or values conservation to take care of your litter and your waste as just part of who you are as a conservationist. So that's it's a gateway issue for us. People that get outdoors, and we've seen an explosion of people that get outdoors across this state in the last 18 months, at least during the pandemic, have produced a great resurgence in that interest, and with that, we've seen a great resurgence in litter accordingly. And so there's some gaps there that we think are important to cover. I'm going to touch on 5 things very quickly. One is, I don't want to restate the problem. I think my colleagues have done a great job of kind of framing the problem. I would just say that what caught our interest, that really got us digging hard into this issue 3 years ago, was the study on plastics in the Tennessee River, where the study compared microplastic pollution in the Tennessee to the Rhine River in Germany and the Yangtze River in China. The Yangtze is several times longer than the Tennessee. The Rhine has a population density many times greater than what we have here, but yet the Tennessee River was chock full of plastics, 2 orders of magnitude more than those other 2 rivers. And that got our attention in a big way. As we started unraveling and peeling back that onion, we started figuring out very quickly that the issue was not just about plastics, it was about litter as writ large across the state. And as we began talking with friends and colleagues, it became more evident that the problem was big and getting bigger. So transitioning from the problem, I want to recognize Mrs. Bible and Mrs. Marshall and the work that they've been doing, because everything that I'm about to say, hear me say this very loud and clear. We need them to be doing more of what they're doing at scale. That is one of the big challenges. One of the big challenges we have is we can do cleanups until the cows come home, and we're going to continue to pick up tons and tons and tons of litter unless we get into real solutions around prevention. We have to have their stewardship efforts ongoing indefinitely, but it can't be the only piece of that. And I know they addressed prevention in terms of education. We think there needs to be a harder look at more robust prevention measures around the state. And we think that this comprehensive study that TACIR is undertaking may shine a light on that in terms of what other states are doing, things like what Ms. Boscarino is doing in Memphis and elsewhere. And we think that's incredibly valuable. Now, in terms of getting into prevention, one of the things that is not talked about a lot, and Ms. Boscarino touched on it, is the opportunity for manufacturing and jobs in this state. We too have built a coalition and are continuing to build it at a fast pace around our CLEAN campaign, our Tennessee CLEAN campaign that you may have heard about. We have several large global companies that are serving on that. And one of the things that we see and hear are companies in this state that are having to go to Japan to source raw material that is reused, having to go to California, or will be going to California to source materials that are reused, all the time in which we have the opportunity to produce those resources for them here in state and keep that home working for us while it could address cleaning up litter. And I'm talking about reuse of materials like plastics, aluminum, glass, things like that. One of our coalition members Strategic Materials, based out of Texas, owns the glass plant here in Nashville on the west side of town. They have told us that if we're successful in trying to achieve some type of recovery program for glass in the state, that they would double the size of their facility almost immediately, both in terms of manpower and size. And Strategic Materials is the largest glass recycler, one of them in the country. They can tell you that in Atlanta, from the time they recover a glass bottle to the time it's back on the shelf is a 30-day cycle turnaround. So there are solutions out there that we need to be looking at, in our opinion. I would point you to the automotive industry. We think that they're a pretty unique example. If you think about how they have evolved, you pretty much any piece of a car, whether it's a starter, whether it's an alternator or a water pump, when you buy a new one, you turn in the old one. If it's a tire, we have a tire program. It's clearly not what it needs to be based upon what we're hearing from our friends in rural Tennessee. But there are all kinds of things like oil. You recycle the oil. You recycle all these different pieces of it. So they're private market examples that we need to be thinking about and tapping into. And so, what I would do in terms of wrapping up here, our approach and our thought as to how to approach this is pretty simple. It is the job of the General Assembly in Tennessee, the governor and the courts, to set policy for our state. And so what we think is a smart way to look at this is to set goals around litter policy and then let the private market come together to develop those solutions. Now, I want to address a mischaracterization of a piece of legislation that we brought forward this past session as a starting point for the conversation. We did file legislation called Tennessee Clean. It is not at its core piece a bottle bill. If it was, I can show you bottle legislation. It's clearly different. It looks and feels different. It has a different flavor. Make no doubt about it, we do have a goal in that bill on how do you recover containers. We don't say how that has to be done. And I'll tell you this as well, that's the starting point. I've been working with elected officials and policymaking for 25 years now. And as part of that effort, I have yet to see, it's rare that you see a bill pass as it was introduced. And so we are anticipating the legislative process to hone and make this effort better. But I want to touch on the characteristics of what we think are important in the solution we're seeking to set that policy at the state level and then let the market come together to fix the problem. Number one, we need a robust response to the problem. It has to capture the scale and the scope of the issue. All of the hard work and money being spent right now are not to scale. We've outpunted our coverage, to use a football metaphor. We are way out of whack in terms of the amount. We have 400 more illegal dumps from one measure to the last measure in the last 5 years, according to one report we've seen. We have litter that people are seeing just anecdotally around that is swamping us. Everywhere we go, every mayor we talk to, it's the number one or number two issue they put on the table to us on a regular, consistent basis. So we have to have something that is robust in the approach. We have to have it be robust enough to address the scale and the scope. And then the last couple of things, we have to bring more resources to support and build on the successful programs we have. And finally, we need to make sure that we bring all the relevant stakeholders in the private market to the table so that they can be part of the creative thinking around solutions. That is absolutely critical. If this does not work for Mr. Fogg's agency, if it doesn't work for people that need to reuse the materials, if it doesn't work for all of those involved, it won't work. And so that is the concept, a big idea around a big problem to fix it using private market ingenuity, creativity, and expertise to come together. With that, it is, I think it was well described by Ms. Boscarino that the problem with litter is that it focuses down on the lack of our solid waste system. And so we know that part of this discussion is going to have to be around solid waste as it relates to litter. But in the end, we do think that this circular economy idea is ripe to be addressed and grown in our state. We see it every day growing. It's grown since we've begun our deep dive 3 years ago, and it continues to expand. There are hundreds of millions of dollars by Tennessee companies being invested right now to capture and be able to use the plastics we have, the aluminum we have, the glass that we have, to put it back to use and to help build jobs and the economy around a sustainable economy. And with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
And thank you. Do we have questions for Mr. Butler? Yes, Mayor. You're recognized, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Butler, as a member of your organization, I'll put that out there, I do look at the material. I'm not as well read or versed in the program that you just spoke about, but I do wonder what is an organization like yours doing to get the hunters to not only pick up what they bring, but pick up the other stuff they come in contact with? What kind of education program are we doing so that we get those of us that love the outdoors to be better stewards, not only of our own trash, but others?
Well, I would say this, that we try to point them to a lot of the work that Mrs. Marshall's organization's doing in terms of cleanups. We promote cleanups through our communications efforts on a regular basis, and we participate in some of them, and other ones we don't. But we do make it available to our friends and supporters to see. We let people know when it's taking place. We push it forward. But in the issue of prevention, where we come to rest as an organization is on the policy side of needing to have a policy approach that leverages the private market in a public-private partnership that will get to that scale I spoke of to solve the problem.
Are there other questions for the panelists? There being none, then the last presenter today is the Honorable Bill Ketron, who is the mayor of Rutherford County, and that we should. And I'm also pleased to introduce him today because I had the privilege to serve with him several years in the Tennessee State Senate, where he rose in leadership, not surprisingly, and we're delighted to have you back here in this room today. Mayor Ketron.
Thank you very much, Chairman and members of the TACIR committee. As a former member of TACIR, I understand the work before you and how important it is to the General Assembly members of whatever study this group undertakes. And this is a very important one, I think, at this point in the history of our state. I come before you today to ask for this study to do a deep dive on two different things. Since I left in 2018, left the Senate and became mayor of Rutherford County, realizing that our county was like many other communities across the state. We are booming in population, and the amount of growth is also, we have recognized the amount of influx of trash and illegal dumping across our county. From one end to the other of 600 square miles, it's getting out of hand. So I convinced our county commission to look deeper into what was in the code and what we could do. One thing that I asked for was to increase the fines for illegal dumping or throwing out trash in our community, in the county, to go to $500 on the first offense and $1,000 on the second offense, and put some teeth into it. And if you drive down the interstate going to Georgia, you'll see signs all along the interstate in Georgia, $1,000 for throwing something out. Well, what we found out was that we do have an environmental court. Judge Ishod is willing to work with us, but the problem is, number one, the Sheriff's Department doesn't want to designate someone from the Sheriff's Department. They'd rather fight crime and take care of those issues, so they don't want his people out spending time giving citations for people illegal dumping. Cities can pass ordinances and increase their fines, but in counties across the state, and I think you need to look at something that would have statewide application for all counties, to increase the fines for illegal dumping or throwing out litter. The issue that we find in the code, which was surprising to me, is that right now in Rutherford County, you know, after we went to the environmental court, after the county commission passed the $500 and $1,000 fine, my environmental judge, Judge Ishod, says, well, Mayor, that's all well and good. However, right now in the code, it's only a $25 fine. Now, it increases for commercial based on poundage that's in the code, but I think it needs to be totally revamped, what is in our Tennessee annotated code. The $25 fine, say if a deputy did see somebody throwing something out, they got a citation for $25. They go to the environmental court in front of Judge Ishod, and it's first offense, so more than likely she throws it out, say don't do that again, okay? That person who receives the $25 fine, it also says in the code that they have the authority to request a jury. Anything over $25, they can request a jury. Well, there's another section of the code that says that General Sessions judges do not have the authority to seat a jury to have a trial. We've got two different sections of the code that are not talking to each other, okay? That has to be corrected. It all needs to come together, and that's probably been on the books for years that way, and so nothing's happening. You know, the judges, she's handcuffed, Sheriff's Department's handcuffed, so I'm probably going to have to hire somebody that has authority through the judge or through the Sheriff's Department, and let somebody be the trash marshal, if you will, Missy. Okay, so the second thing that I ask is that as this study continues to look, is to do a deep dive with TDEC. So when I was on the county commission, when I was elected in 1990, about 1991, 92, when the solid waste regional boards were actually put together by the General Assembly, there was $1 per tire for every new car that was sold in the state of Tennessee. Okay, you go buy a new tire at Tire World, wherever you go and buy your tires, there's a fee down at the bottom, and it reflects that on your bill if they're taking $1 for the disposal of those tires. Okay, that money was supposed to be set aside, and TDEC were supposed to give grants back to the solid waste regional authorities to buy tire grinders. To my knowledge, that has never occurred. So where is that money? I'm asking that this study go back and as far as you can possibly go, if you can go all the way back to 91, 92, whenever that was put in place, go back and pull an audit on where those funds have gone. Fast forward 2016, I believe it was Lieutenant Governor Randy McNally, because I co-prime signed on to the bill with Lieutenant Governor McNally, he put another fee of 50 cents per tire on every new car sold in Tennessee. And those funds were to be collected by TDEC and supposed to go back to taking care of our little litter issue. That also needs to be ferreted out and find out where's the money. Can't that money be distributed back to our local communities? I was a little bit late this morning because Rutherford County is hosting the Governor's Hospitality and Tourism Conference at the Embassy Suites. So I gave a welcoming address. Commissioner Mark Ezell was there. Andy Marshall was there. He's the current president who owns all the Puckett restaurants. And when I told him I was coming here to talk about trash and littering in our state, there was a round of applause because those folks who represent each community across the state and being in their CVB board or et cetera, they understand what your community looks like to tourists who come here and how huge tourism is to this state. And when we bring tourism in, we don't have to build high schools for them. We don't build elementary schools for them. But if those tourists come in and see the trash on the side of the road, it's a reflection on us. It's a reflection on our state of how trashy and nasty we are. This is the time to change the culture. As recycling products, the value went down after China gave up on it. They said, no more, don't send your recyclables here. It went down to Cambodia, it went to Vietnam, and basically they said no more. But because of COVID, what has happened in the last 12 months, all those natural resources, the polymers that go into plastic, your plastic water bottles, your aluminum, all those natural resources have been depleted, and now you're seeing just over the last 6 months, recyclable prices are starting to escalate again. So now's the time to make a difference. Let's change the culture and implement recycling across the state. Hard recycling, whatever we can. Rutherford County seems to be the host of the largest landfill in the state of Tennessee, with Middle Point Landfill that's operated by Republic Services. We've had issues with them. I met with them day before yesterday. They're working with us, but there's a lawsuit that was occurred with our regional solid waste authority because Republic wanted to expand their footprint, and the solid waste authority said no. So now it's going to be caught up in litigation probably for the next year, and depends on who wants, how deep they want to dig their heels in. It's going to continue, and it may last for a long time. It may last for another 6 years, which is the only space left in that current landfill is about another six years. If you look at all the 4 major landfills in Middle Tennessee, there's probably only about 10 years of capacity left in the landfills here. Statewide, you may get a little bit more than that if you combine all the airspace left. But there's got to be some efforts on recycling and taking some of those monies, if you can find that from the tires currently, not just tires, but send it back to the communities and let them implement through educational components in your schools. Let's start educating at the early age where it makes a difference. Those young people will make a difference when they're telling their dad or their grandparents or their aunt and uncle, don't throw that out the window. Okay? I talked to, we put out an RFP, and we had 9 companies from around the world that we are in the process of reviewing on the second round of the RFPs of who wants to handle the waste stream coming into Rutherford County, because Rutherford County gets all of Metro's trash, every bit of it, and another 36 counties around contribute some to Rutherford County's solid waste. There's a company called Pratt Recycling out of Conyers, Georgia. They're interested in forming a P3 with us right now. We have a rail spur that really got their attention. But what I like about that company is they have an end product for everything that they recycle. They take all of their plastic bottles, water bottles, they send it back to their plant in Conyers, Georgia. They sterilize them, they chop them up, and they send them to the carpet mills in northern Georgia and make carpet out of their plastic bottles. They're doing the same thing with glass. There's opportunities out there for Tennessee to stand up and be the leader. We are not the leader anymore. You remember the commercials we used to have with the Indian with a tear coming down his eye, or even our Tennessee trash man driving with a cigar out his mouth and throwing things out the back of his old Cadillac. That made an impression on younger people then. We've got to get back to changing the culture and doing something like Mike said on a big way, letting people know that Tennessee wants to be clean and green again. I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mayor. And I believe Ms. Marshall want to make a comment.
Okay, it's gone on. I wanted to touch, I agree with you 100% on an emphasis on recycling. I think I stated earlier that recently I serve as an alderman in Collierville, Tennessee, and we have curbside recycling. And so every week we can set our recyclables out there, and several of us do. I live it. one of the challenges that we did find when we started the program, we were actually, what we were getting back on the items was actually helping pay for the program. And then, of course, with the issue with contamination in China, it's now costing us to have the program. But what we found, instead of eliminating the program, is that maybe we didn't adequately educate our citizens on how to properly recycle. We no longer take glass. I understand, like Metro Davidson County, they have the strategic materials, but they send their glass to Atlanta or Georgia. And in West Tennessee, all of our recyclables go to the West Tennessee Recycling Hub, but not sure how many materials of those would be using. I do want to refer you to a 2020 study by Keep America Beautiful, and on their website, it does say that it is the most comprehensive study of litter in America. And it's a follow-up to a 2009 study, and it will touch on some of these things. And the challenge that we do have in Tennessee is we do not have a strong recycling infrastructure, and that may be one area where one area may really do recycling and another area doesn't, and then properly educating people on how to recycle, because if those materials are contaminated, I'm not sure how much of a return we're going to get on some of the manufacturers that want to use them. But I just wanted to add to that and reference that study.
Thank you, Ms. Marshall. Are there questions for Mayor Ketron? Mayor Holland?
Mayor Ketron, thank you so much. You referred to the fines and the problems. Are the fines relevant, I guess, to the amount of trash that someone is throwing out? For instance, if you see fast food being thrown out, is there even a fine for that? Or does it have to weigh a certain amount or be a particular kind of, I've heard all kinds of stories.
Right now, it's $25, which is in the code on first offense. Then you get into the commercial. It does have breakdowns in the code based on commercial, and somebody has to determine, is that commercial trash or not? Or is it just a sack, and you go through and have somebody actually sorting through the trash to see if they can find an envelope or somebody's name or anything else. I just bought 6 trail cams with Bluetooth and gave to my work center to start putting up on trees to see if we can capture license plates. One was stolen last week. I guess they saw themselves and said, we're going to dump right here and we're going to steal that camera too, so because deer season's right around the corner, right? But we're doing everything that we can, but it's getting worse with our population of 28 people a day moving into the county. And if our convenience centers are closed, they're like a lot of people. My wife told me to take this to the trash. They don't want to come back home with that in a truck. So they're going to go find someplace and nobody's looking, and they're going to toss it, right? That's what's happening. Okay. We've got to put some teeth into the legislation, Mr. Chairman, and what this committee should do.
Well taken. I think Ms. Marshall wanted to comment, but Ms. Frank is waiting. Mayor Frank is waiting, so. Ms. Marshall, you go ahead if your comment is relevant to what he was.
It is. It has to do with
Mayor Frank's waiting.
The Tennessee litter law. So as I stated earlier, I'm a certified instructor for the Tennessee litter law, as well as Kyle Howard. And so if we come in and we do a litter summit, we're going to explain that. And when Judge Potter came and amended the law a few years ago, that was one of the things that he said. So the act of littering is the act. That's what is illegal. The consequence, the fine, is based on the size. So it's really difficult to catch people driving down the road throwing a can out, or they don't throw cans out because they'll get money for that, but throw a cigarette out or a cup out. It's not difficult if you have the law enforcement dedicated to cover the load. But like in Collierville on 385, it says littering fine up to $3,000. But it's very, again, difficult. So if you throw out gum or cigarette, it's $25. The larger the amount of the item, the higher the fine is. And then with illegal dumping, when we've dealt with and spoke with district attorneys, and I probably should have stated that I have a board that the governor appoints, and it's made up of various people in the industry, like the Grocers Association. We have a district attorney, the Williamson County DAs on our board, where we can focus, whether it's the law, education. And one of the things that they said, there is a burden of proof. It is difficult to find when you find an illegal dump and you go and you might find someone's name on that envelope. That is not, they could say, well, I paid a hauler to take my trash, or my neighbor took the trash and it ended up there. So there is the burden of proof on that, and that is difficult. But when you have constant illegal dumping, as in Mayor Brooks' district, where it is intentional. So there's two kind of litters. There's an intentional litter and there's an unintentional litter. And so these folks that are getting paid to go pick up these tires, you go, you get new tires, there's a fine on it. And I literally asked a tire store that I bought tire from, I said, where does this tire go? Okay, I paid for this disposal fee. Where does this tire go? He goes, I don't know. Some man comes and picks them up and goes and disposes of them. Yeah, they're in Cleveland. And so at the TDOT litter grant training, and some of the solid waste directors have said it's really difficult to find. If there's a way to track, and I think Mayor Brooks, you mentioned you saw a gentleman driving down your city, followed him with a big truck of tires. How do we certify that they are certified and legitimate to be, where are they taking those tires? And so that's where law enforcement, that piece can come in as well. But the fines are based on the amount of the litter. It's illegal because it's the act of actually discarding waste in an improper place, and it's not right. But the fines are determined by the weight of the litter.
Mayor Frank?
Mayor, I recall back in the day, after I was first elected, the state did a survey on that tire fee, and I believe the counties receive that now instead of a grant, more as a direct allocation. So that, I don't know if that was an administrative change, so that would have been when you were a senator. But I don't know how that happened. I just have a vague recollection of that. And you're nodding your head, Janet, I think. Yeah, so. But my question, if it's okay, Mr. Chairman, I really want to ask Janet and Mike, I'm just intrigued by this statement that litter is, I guess, a problem of the solid waste system. And from a county government perspective, we do not have the expertise, and obviously Mayor Ketron is looking at this as well. We don't have the resources to hire an expert in how to address these issues. Do you see a role for TDEC maybe providing more technical guidance on how we can address some of these issues? And then also, Mike, if you don't mind expounding a little bit, you threw out there, the General Assembly could help with policy, but then you envision public-private partnership. What are you talking about in those terms?
I think TDEC currently, I think they do have a role in that. They do have funding or have had funding for the tire recycling program for education as well. They have a materials marketplace where they are trying to get in businesses to list materials that they have that they're trying to get rid of, and other places that would like to buy them. So they have some established work there. So I think they could lean into the circular economy to support that conversation more. I would agree with Mayor Ketron, though, that I believe that the county is receiving funds for tires, but I definitely think there needs to be a deep dive into how those funds are being used. I do understand that they get money to collect and dispose of tires, but I think there is a little bit of mystery about how all that goes on. So,
I agree with that. I think there still needs to be a deep dive into that, because I don't think we're getting a fair share of, I don't know how they distribute it, but if the money was originally set up when the solid waste regional authorities were put together to buy a tire shredder, has the legislation changed? I don't think so.
no.
The legislation's never changed.
And to your,
And my regional board was basically, until this lawsuit came about with Republic, was non-existent. They would meet quarterly, and the last chairman of that board, as a representative of the city of Murfreesboro, sent out last February the agenda, call to order, pass the minutes from the last meeting. Item C is to talk about the University of Alabama and how they whipped everybody's butt in the national championship. That was the tenor of the Solid Waste Authority. They haven't done anything since 1992. They have no money to do anything with it. So go back and do a deep dive on the legislation, find out where the money is. When I called TDEC a year or so ago to find out how much money there was in that from fund from the tires that were coming in, there was millions of dollars. I called a year later, there was no money. Well, they're still selling cars every day, so there's got to be money replenishing that fund, and maybe it needs to be restructured for money to go back into every community, all 95 counties.
all good points, Mayor. Thank you for bringing those up. And to your point, this discussion, this litter grant request to my colleagues at TACIR was a result of my call to my county mayor, who received those very small numbers of dollars. There is legislation when you and I served here together that if it was a tourism hotel motel tax, it had to go to tourism.
That's correct.
I'm not sure that the litter money is being used specifically for litter and/or the tire grinders, so I welcome these comments. Mayor Frank, did you have another follow-up question for Mr. Butler? Or Mr. Butler had a response to your question?
If I remember correctly, it was about the statement about solid waste and and how litter is a byproduct of a broken solid waste system, and then as well the public-private partnership concept. In essence, we've talked about, you've heard today, obviously a big part of litter is behavioral, but there's also a structural issue here, and Missy was right. Incidental litter is a big contributor based on any estimates that we've seen around litter, and that is, for example, we have a tarping law in Tennessee. People don't tarp, or they do a poor job of tarping. I grew up in West Tennessee. You drive down some of those small county roads, and it looks like, a snow of litter on either side. And I can't tell whether that's somebody throwing it out as a behavioral issue or if it's a truck that went down the road without a tarp. So that folds back into the argument on enforcement and evaluating, what's currently on the books from a legislative standpoint. What I was getting at with the public-private partnership piece is, the effort that we're putting forward around clean is not about specific solutions. That is reserved for the process that this legislation would create. So those specific public-private partnerships, we don't pretend to have all of the answers to that idea. What we do see is there are examples in other states, and I'm trying to recall one off the top of my head, to where you do have, and we've heard some today even, private market ideas working with local governments to try to produce results like Mayor Ketchum was speaking of, working with Pratt Recycling, for example. We need that incubator with the goals set in policy with a hard stop on when they need to be implemented to drive those creative thoughts to come up with those types of public-private partnerships. So we don't pretend to have the corner on the market on those ideas. In fact, we have purposefully stayed away from certain specific solutions. We have been very specific with our goals around recovering materials, around containers, around addressing the proliferation of bags, around developing a comprehensive approach to the remainder of the litter stream. And we're going to add a fourth goal in our next iteration of this legislation, which is evaluation of all the legislation that's already on the books. So hopefully that addresses your question. Okay.
Thank you, Mayor Frank. And Director Lippert has a follow-up.
And just briefly, so the issue of the way the money from the tire funds is distributed to counties was one of the issues that we discussed in our tire report a couple of years ago now. And I believe, in essence, your characterization, Mayor Frank, is correct, that it's shifted from the grant program to direct allocations. I just want to say that that report, we're revisiting that report, the findings, the recommendations, and we had some recommendations to try to address the used tire flow and its contribution to dumping. Unfortunately, our main recommendation didn't turn out to be politically viable, so we are revisiting that as part of this study. But and Bob Morio was shaking his head in the back of the room when you. Yep, there he goes. He's now hiding behind his hands. But so we will be revisiting that and to make sure that we've updated all those findings and hopefully come up with a more tenable recommendation.
This has been a riveting conversation this morning. I've learned a new word, literati. Thank you, Janet. And thank you, Mayor McDonough, for asking how to spell that, because I was questioning that very same thing. To the panel, thank you for your time. Thank you for your expertise. Thank you for your willingness to help us as a commission do this deep dive, and I'm grateful that we're going to do it all together. Without objection, we will dismiss tab 6 with our gratitude. Don't litter would be my closing thought.
Mr. Chairman.
Mayor.
Can we be sure that we get contact information for all of these? I didn't see that, and I'd like to have it, please.
Certainly.
Thank
We
you.
will have staff get that to the members. Thank you, Mayor, for that. Certainly, Chairman Yeager has asked if we could begin the process to move towards tab 7. That would be Dr. Kevin Van Zant, the award-winning yesterday Dr. Kevin Van Zant, Public Chapter 585, Acts of 2021, State Gold Depository Draft Report for review and comment. Director Lippert, are there any comments prior to Dr. Van Zant?
No, I believe Kevin will take care of the introduction, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Vice Chairman. Good morning, Commissioners. My name is Kevin Van Zant. I'm pleased to present the draft commission report on the feasibility of a state gold depository in Tennessee, which is behind tab 7 in your docket books. You should also have a 2-page memo that highlights the draft's finding and recommendation. The report is submitted for your review and comment. The final report will be presented for your approval at the next meeting. This report was prepared in response to Public Chapter 585, Acts of 2021, which directed the Commission to study the feasibility of creating a state gold depository, including whether other states or jurisdictions have created one. The first and only state bullion depository in the United States is the Texas Bullion Depository. In addition, there are at least a dozen private depositories located in other states. Studying these, the staff finds that because of high cost, a lack of demonstrated demand, and the fact that precious metals are not exempt from sales taxes in Tennessee, a state depository in Tennessee is not feasible. According to depository officials in other states, building a new depository would have substantial upfront cost, potentially costing millions or tens of millions of dollars. The cost is high because depositories require specialized design features. Depository officials say that to make enough revenue from storage fees to cover cost, a depository would probably need about $1 billion worth of bullion in deposits. For your reference, we have provided a selection of fee schedules from several prominent depositories in Appendix B, starting on page 39. The Texas Bullion Depository started receiving deposits in 2018 and has around $130 million worth of bullion currently in storage, short of the amount needed for the depository to be breaking even at this time. The proponents of the Texas Bullion Depository had originally hoped that the company that manages the University of Texas and Texas A&M University's endowments, a fund that did own gold at the time the Bullion Depository legislation was being considered and passed in Texas, would store their gold in the Texas Bullion Depository, an amount of gold whose value at that time was around $750 million. The endowment has since sold their gold and no longer possesses any gold, but even before doing that, endowment officials said that they wouldn't move the gold to Texas unless storage was cheaper and unless the Texas Bullion Depository became a member of COMEX. COMEX is a commodities exchange that facilitates financial transactions that can be a source of revenue for depositories within its network. COMEX currently requires a depository that stores gold to be within 150 miles of New York City to be a member, which prohibits a depository in Tennessee, just as it did in Texas, from being eligible. There's a timeline on page 16 of the report that includes much of this detail, including the more recent development that Texas lawmakers have authorized a $20 million bond to purchase the Texas Bullion Depository and then lease back the facility to the company that currently manages the depository. For a state depository in Tennessee to reach enough in deposits to be viable, it would probably need, as appears to be the case in Texas, deposits from both individual investors and institutional investment funds. And despite the fact that the University of Texas and Texas A&M endowments did at one point own gold, it seems rare for large investment funds like university endowments to invest in gold. The University of Tennessee endowment, for instance, does not currently possess any gold. And moreover, the Department of Treasury in Tennessee is not authorized to invest in gold, as is the case with Treasury departments in every other state as well. In Tennessee, the Treasury is prohibited from investing in gold by both statute and investment policy. The Tennessee Department of Treasury officials have also noted that regardless of whether the state depository is state-run or a public-private partnership, the state would bear a reputational risk of ensuring the viability of the depository. Some individual investors and collectors, however, even though they can store their precious metals at home, in a safe deposit box at a bank, or in an out-of-state depository, may still prefer to store their precious metals in a state depository located in Tennessee. The fact that there is no private depository in Tennessee to meet this demand suggests the demand is not high enough to support one, which raises the question as to whether there are other factors that make Tennessee a less attractive location for a depository. Stakeholders say that Tennessee's sales tax makes buying and storing gold in Tennessee less attractive than in states that do not tax the sales, and is another important factor that stands in the way of a viability of a depository in Tennessee. Taken together, these circumstances result in this finding. Because no institutional investment funds have said that they will buy or store gold in Tennessee, and because Tennessee's sales tax makes buying and storing gold in Tennessee unattractive to both institutional investors and individuals, the draft report finds that there does not appear to be enough demand for a state gold depository to be viable. Turning now to the report's only recommendation, which involves the state's sales tax on precious metals. Tennessee is one of only 8 states of the 45 states with a sales tax that does not exempt any of the sales of precious metal coins and bullion. While exempting precious metals from the sales tax would not in itself make a depository feasible, there are other reasons for the state to consider this option. Stakeholders say that a sales tax exemption could make it more likely that Tennesseans would purchase precious metals from in-state rather than out-of-state dealers. Proponents of the sales tax exemption also say that it would lead to more tourism dollars in Tennessee by attracting coin shows, and they point out as well that Tennessee does not apply the sales tax to other types of investments like stocks and bonds, to the disadvantage of those individuals who want to purchase and store gold as an investment. In the recently passed American Rescue Plan Act of 2021, there is language that requires states to give back American Rescue Plan funds that are used to offset any net tax reductions resulting from a change in state law. So delaying enacting a sales tax exemption for precious metal coins and bullions may be necessary to ensure that Tennessee does not lose any of the federal funds that it is set to receive through the American Rescue Plan. This issue is currently being litigated. In June of this year, Tennessee, along with several other states, filed lawsuits contesting the constitutionality of that provision. For these reasons, the draft report finds that the General Assembly could consider a sales tax exemption for precious metal coins and bullion once it's clear that the exemption will not violate the American Rescue Plan Act. Thank you. This concludes my presentation of the draft commission report. I look forward to your comments and questions.
Are there questions? Mayor Frank?
I do have a couple. One, just out of curiosity only, why do you believe Tennessee has not exempted? Just sheerly to collect the revenue, or is there any underlying historical reason?
It's been a big frustration of the proponents of this legislation. There's been several attempts. If you look at page 23, we've put into a table recent attempts to get it, that proposed legislation, the form it has taken. It hasn't yet passed. The fiscal note changes over time minorly, but they don't understand why Tennessee, the stakeholders, are reluctant to pass the new legislation on the sales tax exemption.
Okay, and then the fiscal note, what is that impact? How much are we collecting?
The fiscal note, the most recent fiscal note on the most recent bill, I'll point you to page 23.
Okay.
We have a chart there, which has all the attempts at getting the sales tax exemption in one form or another passed in Tennessee. So if we look at page 23, there are some variations of these bills which are worth mentioning. If we start with the most recent one, the House Bill number 514, in General Assembly Session 112, by Gantt, that's what we would sort of think of as a full exemption. And by full exemption, I'll point out three characteristics. One is it applies to both bullion and coins. One is it has a very broad definition of what precious metals are. Some are limited to just gold and silver. And this Gantt bill is gold, silver, platinum, and other precious metals as well. And there's also no threshold. Some of these bills have a threshold which limits what the transactions the sales exemption will apply to. So that is a full exemption, and that fiscal note is $800 in decrease in state revenue and around $118,000 in lost local sales tax revenue.
Thank you.
Mayor Brooks?
Thank you, Chairman. And Mayor Frank, I was just going to say, many of these attempts were filed during my time with Senator Ketron and I, and as Dr. Van Zandt saw in his chart, and the proponents were always the same. Why can't we exempt this? And the answer when I served on finance was, well, that's why we don't have a personal income tax, is because we do rely on the sales tax. And you can't have both. And there was always a strong argument for the tourism, and they're coming from other states and they're going to spend lots of money on hotels and cheeseburgers. Why can't we exempt the bullion? And the answer was always the same through the finance. It is encouraging that they've gotten it from $3 million when I was here down to $300,000. That's quite a scale. Someone has done well adjusting their fiscal note, but thus the argument of we can't exempt everyone, or we in fact would then have the dilemma of, are we going to be a tax-free Tennessee or not on the personal income tax? So, thank you, Mayor.
Mayor McDonald?
Yes, thank you. I would go to what I thought I heard the question from Mayor Franks was, and that is, I see what the fiscal note is, but what is the income that we get as a state from taxing these items? Is it only $360,000?
From the most recent fiscal note, that's correct.
And so we've gone from 3 million, whatever date that was filed, to 360,000, is that correct?
That's correct. Now, that drop on the fiscal note, so if you go from General Assembly to 109 to 110, that's a significant drop in the fiscal note from 2.5 million to 360,000. That's exogenous to the bill structure. That has to do with fiscal committee's refined abilities to try to estimate how much of these transactions are taking place in Tennessee. The higher numbers at the top, they were using a national coin survey from the U.S. Mint, and it wasn't very refined in pointing out differences in states and localities within states. So they started to use new resources during that time period, partly from the ICTA, which is the National Coin Association, and they were able to figure out such issues as how many coin dealerships there are in the state, and believe they have a much more specific idea of what the cost would be to Tennessee.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr.
Through that
Chairman.
additional data.
And as Kevin said, this fiscal note is based on a total exemption, and as he mentioned in passing in his comments, and as it's addressed in some detail in the report, some states exempt just investment gold, so more specifically like bullion, rather than exempting all gold coins and whatnot. The trade-off, and there's always a trade-off, is where that is more specific, it's also a lot harder to administer. And that was one of the comments we got from one of the states that does that kind of targeted exemption, Indiana.
That's correct. In Indiana, if you're trying to distinguish whether you're going to tax a transaction based on where it's going to go, as opposed to a person's personal possession versus an IRA account, that is difficult to administer.
Are there other questions?
This is exogenous of his great work.
Thank you very much. Exogenous. Next, members, I call your attention to tab 8, House Bill 1593, Senate Bill 1235, state contracting in African-American owned businesses. Mr. Morio, our research manager, will make a presentation. You're recognized, sir.
Good morning. In my notes, it's still good morning. Okay. My name is Bob Morio. I am the research manager for this study directed by House Bill 1593, the purpose of which is to examine the state's procurement processes and determine whether disparities exist in the issuance of state contracts to businesses owned and operated by African Americans, to study the effects of such disparities among African American business communities, and recommend actions to reduce any disparities going forward. The Commission is to report its findings and recommendations by January 31st, 2022. So this memo includes preliminary findings from staff's research thus far, which I hope can stimulate some discussion, guide our further research, and help us come up with some possible recommendations for a draft report that will be presented at the Commission's next meeting. To start, memo said, it's important to define what is meant by disparities. It's a term that's arisen within legal context to mean the statistical shortcoming between the number of qualified minority-owned businesses available to provide goods and services, particular goods and services, and the actual share of spending those businesses receive. Figure 1 in the memo shows a simple example where 37.5% of available firms that are able to meet this particular procurement need were minority-owned, and only 25% of government spending was going to minority-owned suppliers. This is a disparity between the availability and the utilization. The need to study these disparities grew out of a 1989 U.S. Supreme Court case when the J.A. Croson Company sued the city of Richmond, Virginia, over its ordinance that required non-minority contractors like Croson to subcontract 30% of their construction dollars to minority-owned subcontractors. The court struck down the ordinance, acknowledging that while the effects of segregation and discrimination put minority-owned businesses at a competitive disadvantage overall, specific evidence of local disparity would be necessary to support this type of a race-based initiative chosen by Richmond. So since Croson, courts have looked at government programs that give preferences based on race with strict scrutiny to ensure both a compelling governmental interest and that such programs are narrowly tailored to achieve that specific interest. The memo looks at the history of the programs in Tennessee to assist minority-owned businesses, starting with 1977, the establishment of the Office of Business Enterprise within the Department of Economic and Community Development, which is known today as Bureau. Establishing this office, the General Assembly acknowledged that some business owners were, I quote, impeded from normal entry into the economic mainstream because of past practices of discrimination based on race and ethnic background, and that the state should, in policy, assist in every practical manner disadvantaged businesses in order to preserve free competition on equal terms. Policy was extended to state procurement in 1988 when the General Assembly amended the Tennessee Small Business Purchasing and Contracting Act, requiring that whenever possible, state agencies must actively solicit bids, both from small businesses and from businesses with minority owners, in order to purchase what they called a fair proportion of purchases from such businesses. Shortly after the Croson decision in 1991, Tennessee Attorney General's opinion clarified that the state's purchasing law was not a mandatory set-aside, as had been the case in Croson, but cautioned that any fair proportion percentage would be open to legal challenge and unlikely to survive, and concluded that if Tennessee is to pursue a goal of establishing race-conscious set-asides, it would be necessary to enact new statutes supported by the sort of factual findings required by Croson. No such programs were enacted, however, and the state continued that policy to solicit bids from minority-owned suppliers whenever possible. Then in 2003, a panel appointed by then new Governor Phil Bredesen found that the previous programs to assist minority-owned businesses had done little to increase participation in state procurement and contracting opportunities, leading to an executive order to create the Governor's Office of Diversity Business Enterprise, which I'll call GO-DBE, to coordinate the state's minority business efforts and assist these businesses in competing successfully for the state of Tennessee's expenditures for goods and services. So then in 2007, GO-DBE hired a firm to conduct a comprehensive study of state purchasing over the 5-year period covering state fiscal years 2003 to 2007. And the results of this study were published in 2009. The authors of the study looked at $6.9 billion in prime contract spending over that 5-year period and found that less than 2% of the spending, 2% of those dollars went to minority or women-owned businesses, and just $28 million, 0.4%, could be attributed to businesses owned by African Americans. Comparatively, the study had determined that 2.2% of the firms available to do business with the state were African American owned, more than 5 times the share of spending they received. Table 1 in the memo shows disparity ratios calculated from the 2009 report for African American owned businesses across 5 different types of business categories that they looked at. And so while the 2009 report acknowledged noteworthy efforts the state had already made to encourage the inclusion of minority businesses in state contracting, including the creation of the governor's office, the results provided what it said are substantial statistical and anecdotal data that minority-owned businesses suffer from the continuing effects of past discrimination, and in some instances, continuing discrimination. And so the report included several recommendations that it intended to address the issues. When House Minority Leader Camper introduced House Bill 1593 earlier this year, she asked the question of whether these recommendations had been acted upon. And so far, much of our research has been looking into that, and we find that many of the recommendations have been incorporated into the state's procurement policies to some extent. These recommendations and our research so far begin on page 5 of the memo, and the draft report in December will include the complete review of each of them. Going forward, on pages 9 and 10 of the memo include some of our ongoing research regarding the question of whether disparities exist today. We don't know yet if enough detailed data is going to be available in the time we have to make direct comparisons to the statistics presented in the 2009 report. But we are continuing to work with GO-DBE to obtain as much data as possible, broken down for African American vendors and by business category, in a way that will allow for comparison over time. One thing we can say is that the share of state spending with African American suppliers has increased dramatically. As I just mentioned, and shown again on page 10, a table copied from the 2009 study, that African American companies received $28 million in spending over that entire 5-year study period, which was 0.41% of the total. A few years later, GO-DBE reported African American owned suppliers received $57.1 million in fiscal year 2014 alone, more than double what it had been spent in the 5-year period, making up 2.1% of the state's $2.8 billion in total spending that year. Since then, the percentage has improved and has been as high as 4.7% in 2019, coming out to an average of 4% over the past 3 years combined. However, increased spending alone doesn't let us say for certain if the disparity between spending and availability has narrowed or been eliminated. The availability side, as I said, it's proving to be difficult to compare exact. The disparity study went through, they hired additional staff, they took 2 years and went through 90,000 contracts and every vendor for, they did a lot more than we're going to do in the next couple of months. So we're looking at alternatives to see how we can measure that progress. One of these is looking at data from the Census Bureau, which shows that there are more African American owned businesses today than there were back then, so it would make sense that the state procures more goods and services from them. Again, the disparity study report found 2.2% of the relevant market of available firms during that period were African American owned. Since then, census data for 2007 shows 2.4% of employer firms in Tennessee that are classifiable by owner's race were owned by African Americans. And that increased to 2.8% in 2012 and is 3% in 2018. So we've seen slow but steady growth in the number of African American owned businesses. But just because we see the share of spending going to African American companies has increased more so than the number of businesses in the state, this doesn't mean that disparities can't still exist. Just that by this one measure at least, it appears that we've seen improvement. Also want to address is the fact that African Americans make up 17% of the state's population, but own just 3% of the state's businesses. And that disparity is not one that's unique to Tennessee at all. So there may be a number of ways the state could increase its support of the African American business community beyond state procurement, and the reporting will include some research in those aspects as well. We're working with GoDBE to get more information about the number of African American firms that are bidding on state contracts, specific business areas where they may be finding success, and areas where there may be opportunities for improvement. Again, looking at Table 1 in the memo, those disparities in the study were greatest for African American companies in construction and professional services sectors, including architecture and engineering. So we're working with GoDBE and trying to get data from Edison to be able to see how spending breaks down across those different business sectors. We're also working to interview members of the African American business community to hear more about their experience with state contracts and doing business with the state. If any commission members have business owners that they think we should speak with, please let us know. Let me know. We'd be happy to reach out. I do want to take a second to publicly thank our summer intern, Carly Bowers, for the great work she did for us before heading back to Knoxville to continue her studies. She was really helpful in looking at what other states were doing with minority businesses, and really appreciated her help this summer. So with that, I turn things back over for discussion and happy to answer any questions anyone has.
Would you repeat the amount of black-owned businesses? You said 17% of the population, and I didn't quite get...
3%. The 2018 is the most recent census data at the state level, and it showed about 3%. That's firms that have employees, which is a smaller subset of, there are a lot of single, sole proprietors. But when you're looking at companies that are looking to do business with the state, looking at firms that have employees is the measure that would makes the most sense.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
You're welcome. Representative Love.
Thank you, and thank you for your presentation. The reference you made was that firms who have employees, that's what the measure we use to determine if it's an African-American owned business?
No, that's just looking at, no, this is a survey of business owners that asks, the business owners' race, ethnicity, all kinds of different things that the Census Bureau has done every few years. The last one was in 2018. Just saying that there's a much larger number of just one-person businesses. Looking at the universe of companies that are bidding on state contracts, that's at least for now what we've looked at those companies specifically.
Thank you. Let me ask you about the disparity ratio.
Mm-hmm.
I'm looking at the chart, Table 1, total disparity ratio, 0.18. And I'm also looking at page 2, where it appears as though the disparity ratio is achieved by dividing the utilization by availability.
Right.
So help me understand, is a higher disparity ratio of 0.6, it could be influenced by either the availability or the utilization, correct?
Yeah, you'd want to be as close to 1 as possible. That would mean that if there are 100, 10% of let's say 3% of companies available were African American owned, and 3% of the dollars went to African American owned businesses, that's an equal ratio.
Right.
What had happened in the, what the study came up with in the past was that $6.9 billion was being spent and $28 million went to African-American companies. So it's a very small amount of a small subset of African-American firms that were even, considered available for those services.
So to your point, to have a disparity ratio on page 4 of a total disparity ratio of 0.18 is not good.
Correct, yeah. It was even, small number of African-American firms available, and, less than 1/5 of the money was going to those firms. That's the...
And looking at the numbers here, but for the other services category of 0.42,
Right.
that disparity ratio would be even more grim, particularly looking at the construction, architecture, engineering, professional services. The other services kind of lift that number up.
Right, and that's, what we have got so far from GoDBE is, as far as the number of minority-owned firms that they have registered, it is concentrated still in the service industries. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison with that 2009 categories, and that's one of the things they're working on, is how do we take today's data and try to make it make sense to what the study was back then. So that we're trying to see in these different areas, if it's improved sort of across the board, has it improved in construction? Has it improved in, in certain areas, or are there still parts of the state's procurement that need more looking at?
Is there any way to determine and then report out the dollars in those areas? For example, how much money was in construction, how much money was in architecture, engineering, how much money in professional services, just to get a picture really of how much was allocated in those particular areas. I think that might be helpful, because then we can see if you got, I forget what the total amount you said was actually distributed, how many millions it was. I forget what that number was.
Yeah, it was like 6.9 billion state spending over the 5 years. Yeah,
6.9.
how much of that was construction, how much of it was services?
Right.
That kind of break that down. Yes,
Because if we see that 5 billion was in goods and services and only 1 construction, I just want to raise that to see where we are, because oftentimes one of the barriers, I think, to African-American companies being available in the construction industry are the other requirements for bonding and licensing, with the fees that are sometimes so exorbitant that it's difficult to make a bid. And then not having the capacity to give that lower bid that other companies who have the history of the bidding process and know that sometimes you give the lower bid knowing that change orders are going to come. And so you bid lower, and those change orders come in, and you still get to then get the amount of money that you are first seeking. But I think those are some of the issues I think that would help us also make a more accurate study, or improve upon the one that we have right now, which is to look at, what are the barriers? Is licensing? Are there ways for GoDBE or state government to incentivize African-American construction workers or the services to go into that field and industry? Is there a process? So I don't want to belabor the whole meeting, so I'll stop my question there, but thank you.
No, that's a good point about the, we've talked to GoDBE, we've talked to a few people, and the barriers to entry is a thing. That specifically was an interesting one about being able to afford to maybe put in a lower bid, and that's something. One of the things that is included now is a lot of especially in construction, that a lot of money goes to minority subcontractors, and so GoDBE has done a good job of trying to encourage that, and one of the things in the 2009 study was talking about trying to help bridge that gap and grow from subcontractor to prime contractor, and so that's something that we're looking at.
And if I could, Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I said I wasn't going to say nothing else, but I just want to add this point. I think for those who are watching and maybe listening, the question may be asked, well, why does it matter? Why do we want to incentivize and overly pursue measures? 2017 study by the Brookings Institute looked at persons who were incarcerated across the country. And they looked for a common denominator for why persons, this 500,000 subset, the common denominator was parental income. What they found was a good number of persons in the 37208 zip code, which is here in Nashville, Tennessee. If you're born in that zip code, you are 7 times more likely than anybody else in the country to go to prison before age 30 because of parental income. Now, that's not the only factor. But for those who may wonder, well, why does it matter? Why do we incentivize? Because if you have low parental income, all the other causal effects come out, and some correlative effects come out, right? That you got low parental income, then you have low enthusiasm about education, you have some adverse child experiences possibly, and then it leads to a lower quality of life. And so if we can find ways to incentivize and level the playing field for bidding processes and other venues for certain subset of businesses, we may find that parental income increases and the other opportunities are open, educational opportunity, housing opportunities, health care is better, and then we may see a correlation between these businesses getting contracts and then the families in those areas benefiting more. So just wanted to put that out there. Thank you.
Representative Parkinson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to my colleague from Davidson who laid it out extremely well. You know, here's the thing I always tell everyone is that, you know, here in America, there's a lot of money in America. I mean, there's a lot of money in America. And even some of our most wealthy individuals that live in our state, you know, they've only accessed what I would consider crumbs off the crust of the pie to achieve the amount of wealth that they've achieved. Because there's a lot of money out there. And so, you know, a lot of times we'll find ourselves, you know, in a push and pull to access, you know, some of the money that's out there. And so sometimes we'll get, you know, pushback from, you know, businesses or other, you know, policymakers, you know, when we fight for, you know, for African Americans to have access to some of this money. Now remember the scale rather that I just put it in. Some of our most wealthy individuals in Tennessee, and I'm not talking about African Americans, some of our most wealthy individuals in Tennessee have accessed a crumb off the crust of the entire pie and have accessed wealth that is beyond, that will be multi-generational for their families. And so when we say we want to create access and you know, start leveling the playing field for African Americans, if they got a crumb and they got, you know, wealth for generations, just imagine what that small speck would do of that crust for that African American family. And so keep that scale in mind, you know, as we're continuing to have these conversations. But when you look at, can you give me those numbers again?
Which ones? The
6.9.
Yeah, during that study, the state had spent $6.9 billion, 2003 to 2007, and it was just at 0.4%, just $28 million had gone to African Americans. So then currently, it's been averaging about 4% of what the state's spending, which is, almost $4 billion a year.
Right, right. And so when you look at that, it's so lopsided, the scale, and for African Americans to have more access is no threat to the individuals that are actually getting the actual crumb. And let's keep that in mind because the more we improve quality of life for those of us that are struggling, the better the entire state is. The entire state wins when quality of life for those that have not had the best of quality of life improves. That means crime is reduced. That means more education, better health care, more jobs produced, more jobs created, an improved workforce. But more importantly, it takes people out of survival mode. And things change. I would challenge any scientists that may be listening or watching, or any of our scholars in Tennessee, to tell us how the brain changes and processes when a person is in survival mode versus when their quality of life is in a better state. Now, my question that I did want to ask is, can you expound on those businesses that are available and what that means?
Sure. So the disparity studies have a specific measure of the relevant market. Let's say the state is trying for, the architecture and engineering sector, for example. What is the universe of companies that the state is bidding for architecture and engineering work with the state of Tennessee? And what they do in these disparity studies is look at the bidders list. Every time a contract has gone out, which companies have bid for it? Where did they come from? Were they minority owned? And so in that case, there's a threshold of at least, you get to a point where you've included at least 80% of the companies that have been bidding. So if more than 80% of the companies have been in the state of Tennessee, then you use the state of Tennessee as your availability. For some things like that, you have to go, it could be Tennessee and surrounding states. It could be the entire country for, buying pencils and staplers. Like, companies from all over the country are bidding on things like that. So that becomes your availability. It's who are the firms that are available for each type of good or service, and what is the proportion of African American owned businesses for that? So it could be, in some cases, something really obscure, that minorities are traditionally underrepresented in. The availability is a smaller piece. So you would, let's say only 1% of nuclear physicists were African American. You wouldn't expect more than that amount we'd be spending on that particular service because it's a smaller availability. So it's an important measure of, that's why we want to try to break it down and see, okay, well, spending's going up. How is it still relative to the availability in areas like, the services or some of the things where African American companies have been better represented? Then there should be a higher ratio, a higher amount of money going there because there is more availability, and so that math becomes that disparity ratio.
Mr. Chair. Yeah, thank you. And with that being said, are there barriers to availability?
Yes.
For these African American companies?
That's one of the things that in our interviews, and that I think I at least hope if we can try to break it down into some of these different business categories and see, are we just not getting, are there areas that are underrepresented? Those would be the kinds of things you'd want to target to say, okay, well, looks like we need more outreach to this particular area. Target what the state would want to do to improve the situation. So, yeah.
Just last follow-up, and I would just expand what you just said, not just outreach, but development in those areas, because if apparently this is math, so if there are barriers to availability and there's less availability, then that number goes down as to what the expected output is for that for the,
Right.
right. Did y'all get that? I heard it in my head, but, right. So for that contract, there will be less of an output expected because there's less availability, but there's less availability because there is less development in that area for African-American businesses to operate and to contract with the state. Just trying to peel the layers back.
Exactly, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I guess I would like to find out, is there any information that you have regarding best practices from other states? What are they doing to make it better for situations like this?
We're trying to do our best to compare.
Thank you.
At least to compare the data that's available, and we're actually finding, we try to look at our neighbor states and see where are we at in this percentage, and most of them don't have as much publicly available data. Like, we're trying to dig up stuff from them as well. So in one aspect, we're at least doing a pretty good job of reporting as far as, our opinion so far of the research we're doing. But yeah, looking at, I think the highest standard in with minority business is through the federal government that does a lot. But it has also established its constitutional ability to do so, within, the legal as a country, you have the history of past discrimination and the disadvantages. It's that, that Supreme, we can't say, oh, how is it specific to Tennessee? How is it specific to construction in Nashville? You have to get to that specific, level of analysis if you want to say we need to help African American companies in construction. That's why that one was struck down, because they didn't have that specific evidence. So we're looking at just generally speaking, we'll have a good, probably kind of like a comprehensive appendix of different state, minority business offices, kind of find the equivalent of what we have versus what they have.
Are there other questions, Mayor?
Going back to what Representative Love has said about the zip code and the high number of people in that zip code that ended up in prison before age 30, and he spoke of the education. To me, a lot of this, and I agree with the best practices, taking what we can to Tennessee, but a lot of this seems to go back to the education. And, once again, beginning at a very young age, not just starting to teach the skills, but if you've got people in construction or in some of these different occupations, and they're being left out of the bidding process and other areas, have they not received the education on how to bid and how to get to the top? I know that with our, with the government's money that they gave to the different businesses, and many businesses did fine. They didn't go out of business, but it was amazing in our own town that with the education that we thought we were doing, the ones that you would talk to, and they hadn't heard of it, or they didn't know how to apply for it, and so they stopped everything. And so I think it's across the board is education, and we might think, well, yeah, the word is out there, they know about it, but in reality, no, they don't. It's just a very small number that does.
Are there other questions? There being none, thank you very much.
Thank you.
I believe there's no other business to take up, and the only other agenda item was our selection of our December meeting. Since we've lost a few of our members, we've asked the director to poll all the members about the most convenient date for us. And if unless there's an objection to that, And if there's no other business, Chair will entertain a motion to adjourn. So move. Thank you.
Non-debatable.